What if one quiet morning we opened our eyes and the seasons had disappeared? No spring, no autumn, no soft transition between warmth and cold, only an eternal winter spreading across the horizon. Imagine the air carrying a sharper stillness, the sky pale as if it had been washed clean of colour, the low sun casting only frail warmth that struggled to reach us. What if that was the world we were born into, not just for one long year, but for thousands upon thousands, a rhythm of time so vast that no single lifetime could measure its beginning or its end? The Ice Age was not a sudden shiver, not a single hard freeze that arrived one night and left the next. It was a cycle, a great song of earth made of cold verses and rare, brief refrains of warmth. Glaciers advanced like slow giants, not because they rushed, but because they never ceased to move. Every day the ice grew by only the faintest measure, but the days gathered into centuries, and centuries gathered into epochs, until entire continents wore thick armour. These sheets of frozen water became higher than towers, flowing outward, pressing down, scraping stone into silence. What we call solid ground was carried away, reworked into valleys that hold rivers now, into cliffs that bear scars of ancient grinding. The land we know is not the land that was. What if the forests that once grew near us are buried under ice we will never touch? What if the rivers we love today are nothing but the children of greater rivers erased by glacial floods, their paths forgotten by human memory? Glaciers did not only change the shape of mountains, they changed the shape of life. Animals were forced southward, following the line of warmth that fled before the ice. Some adapted, growing coats of thick fur, spreading wider paws, building patience into bone and sinew. Mammoths walked where cities stand now, their shadows falling across ground that feels permanent to us, but once trembled beneath the cold weight of ice. Entire ecosystems bent and broke, and woven into those landscapes we find ourselves, our human ancestors, tracing the edge of survival through snow and hunger, carrying fire not as luxury but as necessity, each spark a small resistance against the world's endless winter. The story of the Ice Age is written quietly in stone, in fossil, in ice itself, in Greenland and Antarctica. Within cores drilled deep into frozen vaults, oxygen isotopes whisper a timeline of shifting climates. These frozen layers cradle ancient air, tiny bubbles that trap the breath of forgotten skies. By listening closely, scientists hear the echoes of carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen, voices of old atmospheres. They tell us when the Earth warmed, and when it froze again, when species flourished and when they withered. What if every bubble of ice holds not just a record, but a kind of memory, an Earth that remembers itself in ways we are only learning to understand? And if Earth remembers, do we, or do we only imagine? The cave paintings of mammoth and bison suggest a kind of memory built into art, a testimony of life and death passed forward through pigment and stone. Yet paintings fade, bones decay, glaciers melt, and what remains slips into silence. Perhaps memory is not what endures, but what returns. Ice returns, in cycles of cooling and warming, as though the planet itself breathes in deep time. And what if our own species is only another note in that larger breath, destined to be exhaled and forgotten in the long rhythm of ice and sun? Close your eyes and picture what it might have felt like to stand on the edge of one of those great ice sheets. The air cold enough to sting, snow whispering across the plains, each gust containing fragments of grit and stone pulled from far away. Above you, the sky stretched vast, pale blue to violet, the sun moving low across it as if reluctant to climb. Nights glimmered with auroras, curtains of green and crimson light spilling through darkness, silent yet somehow alive. In such a world, days and nights merged into something slower, a kind of stretched time where survival was not just about food or warmth, but about remembering that tomorrow would still come. We often imagine the Ice Age as alien, harsh, hostile, and yet for countless creatures it was simply life. Children were born under frozen skies, families told stories in the flickering glow of firelight, migrations ebbed and flowed across tundras and steppe, To them this was the world they knew, not a catastrophe, but a home. What feels impossible to us today might have felt inevitable to them. The strange possibility arises, could an ice age have shaped not only our landscapes, but our minds, our myths, our very sense of time? And still the question lingers. If glaciers could erase forests, rivers and worlds entire, what else might they have carried away without trace? What cities, what songs, what languages might have existed beyond the edge of written history, buried beneath layers of ancient ice? Could there have been stories that no one now remembers, cultures ground away like boulders beneath a sheet of ice, replaced by silence so profound that only geology speaks of what once was? These are the echoes we inherit. A world that froze not once but many times, a planet that breathes in ice and melts in warmth, never stable but always changing, always erasing and rewriting. To stand inside that realization is to feel how fragile permanence really is. Our maps, our coastlines, even our memories are only temporary drawings on a canvas that the earth itself will wipe clean. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? Perhaps the glaciers themselves know. They are not only ice, they are breath made solid, the long exhalation of the world. Their presence is patient, steady, relentless, pressing outward with a weight that no single moment can feel, but which time itself cannot ignore. To watch a glacier is to witness slowness beyond our grasp, a slowness that is not stillness, but motion stretched into eternity. The breath of ice reshaped continents. With every fragile snowfall, crystals gathered on crystals, compacting under their own weight until even softness turned to stone. But unlike stone, glaciers moved. They flowed like rivers, not of water but of frozen memory, pushing against mountains, pouring into valleys, grinding rock into powder, finer than ash. Each step they took was silent, but silence is still a kind of roar when measured in the scale of millennia. To walk across such a surface would be to walk upon history itself, though a history not written for us. When they advanced, they carried everything in their path. Boulders larger than houses were plucked from mountainsides, carried for miles, and set down in meadows where no one could ever explain them. Rivers vanished, forests broke, and air grew sharper, drier, infused with dust drawn up from the surface of the world. Entire ecosystems were compressed into smaller, fragile corners of the earth, where warmth lingered, pockets of life enduring only because the ice did not notice them. These refuges became seed banks of the future, hidden places where trees and grasses waited for their time to return. The breath of ice was not only destruction, it was creation. New valleys opened, U-shaped and vast. Lakes were carved out, waiting patiently to be filled when the ice withdrew. Rock flour, the powder ground down by glaciers, fed rivers and oceans when released, turning the waters fertile, feeding the smallest of creatures, who in turn nourished entire food webs. Life adapted not just by resisting ice, but by using its gifts. Could it be that the glaciers were not only sculptors of stone, but also sculptors of possibility? And still the breath was steady. The world inhaled cold and exhaled ice, over and over again. When glaciers receded, they left moraine ridges like scars scattered across the land, silent testimonies of where the boundary of ice had once stood. Scientists trace these outlines with care, mapping the reach of ancient winters. In these ridges they see a rhythm, a cycle controlled by the tilt of Earth's axis, the shape of its orbit, the slow dance of planets and stars pulling at us. Even glaciers, it seems, are bound to the sky. If you listen closely, it is almost as though ice is breathing still. The cracking of distant glaciers in the polar night, the sound of icebergs carving into the sea, the sigh of meltwater streams tumbling beneath blue chambers of compressed ice. Each sound is fragile, hushed, yet it carries a voice much older than ours. Perhaps this is how the planet reminds us of time's true scale, not through words, but through movements too slow to see and too vast to hold. Close your eyes and imagine yourself at the edge of one of the great ice sheets, thousands of feet high. It does not tower like a mountain. It simply exists, stretching outward in all directions, white and blinding under the muted sky. The air is so sharp it burns in the lungs. Every breath a reminder of the scale of winter. You cannot see the glacier move, but beneath you, beneath the silence, it flows. Each step across it is a step across centuries, though you may never know it. Glaciers breathe through decay. Snowfall piles, compresses, changes and sinks. Old layers vanish, pressed into depth, becoming something else entirely. Nothing remains what it was. Everything flows downward, changed by pressure, time and silence. What then of us? Of our lives? Could our stories too be compacted, reshaped, forgotten beneath the accumulating drifts of history until they are no longer ours, but fragments of a larger cycle? Perhaps that is the true breath of ice. Not only glaciers, but the way time exhales and inhales, stretching memory until the past becomes strange and unrecognizable. If we forget what once stood beneath the ice, if we cannot even picture the warmth it erased, who is to say what else has been carried away in silence? What songs, what stories, what unnamed creatures lie locked in frozen oblivion, waiting for some distant melting day? And as the glaciers whispered forward, grinding, shaping, erasing, creating, life listened, adapted, survived. The breath of ice was everywhere, yet invisible. It gave silence its sound, time its patience, and earth its slow heartbeat. But with every breath, there is also a pause, a lingering space before the next exhalation. What might emerge in that pause? And so we turn to the oceans, to the water that once was sky, gathered and hidden away in the cold vaults of ice. For if so much water could be removed from the seas, reshaping the very map of the earth, what other secrets might the frozen breath of glaciers have revealed? What other secrets might the frozen breath of glaciers have revealed? Perhaps the greatest secret was not written in stone but in water, for when the glaciers grew and thickened, they did not form only from snowfall, but from the slow gathering of oceans themselves. Every flake that fell and took its place upon the expanding sheet of ice was water that once belonged to the sea. Little by little, tide after tide, the vaults of cold swelled larger, as though Earth was transferring its oceans to the sky. Imagine standing on an ancient shore tens of thousands of years ago. The waves stretched away, but not as we know them now, for with so much water locked in ice, sea levels were far lower. What we call coastlines today did not exist. They were stranded far offshore sunlit plains where grass and herds once roamed, now buried beneath restless waves. Entire continents swelled outward into seabeds that we have forgotten were even land. If we could step backward into that time, we would walk upon wide, sweeping territories now hidden under surf, forgotten kingdoms beneath the sea. The oceans retreated by nearly 400 feet, unveiling vast bridges of earth where continents kissed and touched. The Bering Land Bridge stretched like a frozen road between Siberia and Alaska, inviting animals and humans across. Europe's rivers flowed wider and deeper, fed by melt even as the sea drew back. The English Channel was not water, but valley, carved by rivers weaving down into what today is salt and tide. Australia was part of a mighty, larger continent, united with New Guinea under cloudless skies. What we think of as islands were once hills. What we think of as seas were once fertile plains. Is it possible that civilizations, small and unrecorded, flourished upon those vanished landscapes? Could there have been settlements, cultures, even forgotten voices whose homes now lie drowned beneath the Atlantic or Pacific? If fire once burned on those plains, if songs once echoed there, they were erased not by time alone, but by rising seas reclaiming their treasure. These sunken places are true blank pages, for oceans erase almost all memory of what they cover. The stone foundations of cities cannot endure out there, and the whispers of stories are swallowed by tide and entropy alike. And yet, the possibility lingers. When the ice sheets drank the oceans dry, they gave us space to wander. When they melted, they took those spaces away. This breathing of ocean's retreat and return is one of the clearest pulses of Earth. Geologists trace shorelines etched into rock, raised beaches and drowned cliffs, finding evidence of water's shifting reach. In isotope ratios left inside shells of marine creatures, we can still measure the rhythm of glaciation, the building and collapsing vaults of ice that tightened and loosened their hold on the seas. Oxygen isotopes, heavy and light, whisper about temperature, salinity, and the global balance of Earth's waters. Each record is not only science but song, like a score written across millions of years of shell and sediment, waiting to be read. The oceans themselves responded differently during glacial times. With water stolen into frozen vaults, salinity grew stronger, currents changed course, pushing warmth where it was unexpected, chilling waters elsewhere. These deep rivers beneath the surface played their quiet role in shaping climate, redistributing heat, stirring nutrients. Entire systems of life in the sea, plankton blooms, fish migrations, predator ranges, shifted like shadows across time, not from their own choice, but because the oceans had changed their breath. Perhaps what is most humbling is how invisible this transformation would have felt to those alive then. A coastline did not vanish overnight, but withdrew at a pace that no single life could grasp fully. A grandfather may have fished a river delta. His grandson may have fished farther out, his great-grandson farther still. Little by little, memories stretched until they could not remember where the tide once was, until what had always been land seemed always to have been sea. Such is the nature of vast cycles, that forgetting becomes part of survival. Close your eyes and picture that hidden world, wide plains beneath today's oceans, mammoth herds crossing where fish now swim, grasslands stretching where whales now travel. These are not fancies but realities of the Ice Age Earth, the reconfiguring of maps that seem so rigid to us now. Maybe beneath the Mediterranean, once a fertile basin, maybe beneath the South China Sea, once a plain of wind and dust, maybe beneath the Gulf of Mexico's depths are stories buried beyond recall. What if memory itself has a tide, retreating beyond reach when the seas return? And so when the ice finally began to melt, its locked-up vault of water surged back into the world. Shorelines vanished beneath rushing waves, continents shrank, and encampments fled to higher ground, leaving only empty silence where they once stood. Entire ecosystems redrew themselves around the new margins of sea and land. The ocean, it seemed, did not only return, but demanded payment for its long absence, swallowing whatever had dared to grow upon its lost floor. Perhaps this cycle will repeat. Perhaps the ice will gather again in patience, locking away the seas, opening old bridges, exposing hidden lands. Or perhaps the opposite will unfold, warmth spreading so completely that the vaults never close again, oceans swelling endlessly until the maps we know dissolve at the edges. What if our cities now, our ports and towers and coastlines, are already as temporary as mammoth herds once were, waiting only for the next change in tide? The vaults of water remind us permanence is illusion, land is never fixed, and the oceans are never still. They breathe as glaciers breathe, as the planet itself breathes. And it is to this breath that we must now turn deeper still into the cores of ice, where bubbles of vanished air wait to tell us what truly passed. Into the cores of ice, where bubbles of vanished air wait to tell us what truly passed. For deep within the frozen heart of Greenland and Antarctica lie diaries not written in ink nor carved in stone, but inscribed in molecules, in the most delicate fingerprints of chemistry. These frozen archives are Earth's memory, the quiet journals of snow compacted into ice, preserved across tens of millennia. Every layer of snowfall, pressed into silence, holds the breath of the sky it once touched, and in that breath are the isotopes, subtle variations of oxygen and hydrogen, whispering secrets of temperature, of storms, of ages that came and went. To study ice cores is to read layered time. Scientists lower drills into sheets more than 2 miles thick, turning the cold interior up to daylight for the first time since it was sealed. What emerges is a cylinder of ice, clear at first glance, yet dense with invisible patterns. Slice by slice, these cores are calendars of the planet, stacked snowfall upon snowfall, year upon year. In some places, the depth holds hundreds of thousands of years, each inch a frozen today for someone who never lived to see its tomorrow. The isotopes inside this ice behave like storytellers. Heavy oxygen, light oxygen, their ratio shifting with warmth and with cold. In warmer years, snow carries more of one kind. In colder years, more of the other. When scientists measure these subtle imbalances, they trace the long pulse of Earth's climate, the rises of warmth, the plunges of frost, the swings so vast, no human alone could ever comprehend them. These isotope records reveal not only the coming and going of ice ages, but the rhythm behind seasons of deep time, dictated by the orbital dance of the planet itself. And in between these rhythms there are events, sudden warmings, sudden chills, captured as sharp turns in the isotope trails, brief anomalies that turned the lives of ancient animals and humans upside down. In layers of ice we can still see the whispers of volcanic winters, the ash of erupted mountains carried across continents, settling quietly into the Arctic snow. We can measure the fall of greenhouse gases, or the sharp dips that accompany extinction events. Time stretches, but in ice it also sharpens. The frozen diary remembers longer and more faithfully than any human tradition could. Yet as we read these isotope lines, we must ask, do we truly understand memory? Ice remembers by holding still, by refusing to let its molecules slip away. But memory in all forms is fragile. The deeper scientists dig into these cores, the more the ice itself begins to change. The weight of centuries presses layers into each other, blurring what was once distinct. In the oldest ice, years collapse into decades, decades into centuries, clarity folding into fog. Perhaps even Earth forgets, its own diary rewritten by the pressures of time. And what if memory is always like this? Our human attempt to preserve fossils, paintings, stories, are they not also compacted, blurred, eventually merging into something less precise than they once were? Perhaps memory is not a vault, but a river, flowing and eroding even as it records. The ice reminds us, memory is never perfect. It is only approximation, shadow, echo. Sometimes, though, the details are startlingly sharp. Inside some cores, not just isotopes, but tiny bubbles of air remain, trapped for tens of thousands of years. They hold the exact composition of an ancient atmosphere. To hold an ice sample to your lips is to come face to face with the air mammoths once breathed, the air of forgotten forests and vanished plains. It is a startling intimacy to touch directly the breath of history. Through these bubbles we know how much carbon lingered in the sky, how oxygen waxed and waned, how methane rose during warming events. The planet speaks in chemistry, and the diary answers with science. And yet, is it only science? Or might there be something more, something deeper? When we measure these molecules, when we trace ratios and patterns, are we not also listening for voices? The voice of a world before humanity had words, before memory was carried in language, before forgetting itself had shape. This is not just atmosphere. It is silence made visible, absence given form. Close your eyes and imagine turning the pages of ice, each one translucent, fragile, glowing blue in the polar light, each page falling farther back, farther down, until you are touching snows that fell before any city ever rose, before fire itself was tamed. The further you go, the quieter it becomes. Memory dissolves into enormity. But even that has its limit. Eventually, ice melts. Isotope trails scatter, diaries end, and then silence resumes. Not the silence of glaciers moving, but the silence of things forgotten beyond return. Perhaps this too is part of Earth's story, what it chooses to remember, and what it allows to disappear forever. And so, as we hold these frozen pages, we ask again if the isotopes can reveal the forgotten climates of Earth. What else might be written in matter itself? Could stone remember? Could oceans dream? Could the dust of a desert carry the trace of an ancient forest long vanished? The diaries of ice give us direction, but they are not the end. They point beyond themselves, beyond the frozen silence, to the lives of creatures whose bones remain scattered across tundras and plains. For what good is the diary without the characters who lived within its time? Beyond the frozen silence, to the lives of creatures whose bones remain scattered across tundras and plains. For the Ice Age was not empty. It was alive, humming with breath and hunger, with the soft tread of paws across snow, with the thunder of hooves upon steppe. In that long winter of the world, animals thrived in forms both familiar and astonishing. Giants cloaked in fur, hunters with fangs like daggers, birds with wings that cast shadows across frozen earth. They walked in landscapes that would feel harsh to us, yet to them it was home. We picture them most often through bones pulled from permafrost, or through the hushed artistry of cave walls, mammoths drawn in ochre and ash, bison etched beside the flicker of fire. Yet these fragments are only echoes, pale reflections of the full living creatures they once were. Imagine them as they had been. Mammoths with tusks curving like moons, moving together in herds, stepping carefully across grasses crusted with frost. Their breath steamed in the air, each puff vanishing into the sky like a fleeting ghost of heat. Mothers led calves toward shelter, their footsteps tender even in a world so cold. Alongside them, woolly rhinoceroses pressed their bulk through low scrub, scraping snow aside with wide horns to uncover hidden shoots of grass. They had no fear of ice. They belonged to it, their very bodies sculpted for a frozen stage, and in the shadows of evening cave lions prowled. They were larger than any lion we know today, powerful and silent, their coats thick against the chill. They hunted reindeer and horse, stalking through tall grasses that bent stiff with frost, slipping through pale light like phantoms. Above all, the steppe itself carried abundance. Reindeer, muskox, bison, wild horses, the great herds moved in constant migration, painting the plains with their living tide. They were food for predators, partners to people, and keepers of balance. Where they grazed, they shaped the land. Where they fled, predators followed. The Ice Age was not barren. It was ecosystem, vast and intricate, alive in its own rhythm. Among the giants was also fragility. The great short-faced bear, towering above any human who ever crossed its path, roamed with strength that seemed invincible. Yet it too faded when climates shifted. Its reign shortened in the long story of survival. The saber-toothed cat raised its fangs against prey that dwindled too soon, its power unmatched yet undone by changes beyond its control. We know these forms, but only as silence now. Fossils and frozen remains tell of their presence, but their movements, their voices, their ways of life, we must imagine them back into existence, for memory does not hold sound. To walk in that world would be to walk among echoes made flesh. The ground beneath your feet would shake with the passing of mammoth herds. The night air would shimmer with the call of wolves larger than any you have seen. The sky itself might darken with flights of giant birds, terrors to small prey, beauty to the eye that watched. These creatures did not live as relics. They lived as present moments, trusting instinct, moving through landscapes as eternal to them as our cities feel to us. And within their world we were present too. Human hunters followed herds across frozen plains, learning to read the footfalls of bison, the trails of reindeer, the signs of mammoth migrations. We shared the cold with them, and in sharing, we were shaped. Their hides warmed us, their bones framed our shelters, their muscle fed our families through winters that tested every spark of endurance. But perhaps more than survival, they gave us story. They were painted on cave walls not because they were only prey, but because they were companions in shaping existence. To paint them was to honor them, to weave their breath into ours. And yet, many of these companions slipped away, one by one. As the climate shifted and the glaciers drew back, grasslands shrank, forests returned, and the vast cold plains fragmented into smaller habitats. Creatures adapted slowly, yet sometimes too slowly, and we too had our hand in their fading. For as hunters grew more skilled, herds grew thinner, and the balance wavered, was extinction the price of survival? Or was it simply the rhythm of entropy that everything, no matter its grandeur, eventually passes into silence? Even so, their shadows remain. In the DNA of modern elephants lies the code of mammoths, waiting in quiet spirals of memory. In the musk ox still roaming, we see an echo of the Ice Age herds. In wolves, in reindeer, in scattered bones along riverbanks in Siberia, the past breathes faintly, unwilling to vanish entirely. Perhaps extinction is not erasure, but transformation, the living carrying fragments of the lost. It is easy to see these vanished animals as impossibly distant, but they walked only yesterday in Earth's time. Tens of thousands of years are nothing on the scale of geology. Their hoofprints may still lie beneath soil we walk upon. Their breath may still linger in bubbles of air, sealed inside ice. What we call prehistory was their present tense, their immediate now. And if their now has disappeared into our long ago, what of us? What of the animals that roam with us today? Could we too become paintings on cave walls, fossils in rock, whispers in ice cores? Maybe, maybe not. But the Ice Age animals remind us that permanence is a dream, and even giants can vanish without sound. And yet, to think of them is to bring them back, to picture mammoths beneath auroras, to hear the imagined tread of cave lions through long grasses, to feel the herd thunder through silence. This is to give them one more breath, and perhaps that is enough, for now. The fur. But if these creatures could be carried into silence so easily, what of us who shared their world? What shadows of humanity moved among mammoths and lions, leaving behind only fragments of stone and firelight? What shadows of humanity moved among mammoths and lions, leaving behind only fragments of stone and firelight? The Ice Age was not theirs to command, but it was theirs to endure, shaping every heartbeat of existence. In that long, cold world, humans were fragile creatures, without tusks for defense, without fur for warmth, without mountains of strength. And yet they walked, they hunted, they survived, leaving only faint shadows along the edges of ice. Picture them, small groups huddled against the wind, firelight flickering across faces marked by smoke and hunger. Around them stretched the wide, unending plain, snow-dusted grassland dotted with herds they hoped to follow and predators they feared in silence. They carried tools chipped from flint, crude yet sharp, sparks of ingenuity in a landscape that was otherwise unforgiving. Each tool was fashioned by hand, passed from one life to the next as both survival and teaching, and so knowledge, as fragile as fire itself, moved forward invisibly in their shadows. The plains were immense, and yet they left no maps. They knew the land by memory, by rivers, by cliffs, by where herds once passed. Trails invisible to us now unfolded clearly to them. The lines of animals, the migrations of reindeer, the wanderings of mammoth herds, they followed patiently, step by step, never rushing, because to rush was to burn more energy than the body could afford. Their rhythm was tied to the rhythm of the animals around them, feast when herds passed, near starvation when they vanished. In caves their voices took different shape. On cold nights, tucked away from the howl of wind, they pressed pigments onto stone. Horses ran across walls in ochre, mammoths lumbered in charcoal, lions crouched and leapt through shifting shadows cast by fire. Why did they paint? Was it memory, ritual, instruction, or was it wonder? The same wonder we feel now in imagining them. Perhaps these images were their way of keeping shadows close, of ensuring that what walked beyond the firelight would never fully slip into absence. But survival was always near the edge of failure. Winters stretched with cruel indifference. Small children had to be carried when the snow grew too deep. Food was smoked to last longer, fat rendered into candles of nourishment. Fire was not only heat, it was safety, it was memory, it was life compressed into flame. To lose a fire in the darkness of an Ice Age night was to lose more than warmth. It was to risk tomorrow itself. And so fire was passed with ceremony from branch to branch, from camp to camp, kept alive like a child who must not die. Imagine the silence of one of these camps beneath the vast aurora. Above, the sky spills green and crimson light across darkness, silent curtains swaying. Below, a small circle of humans, their shadows bending on the snow, listening to the distant thunder of herds, the faint howl of a wolf. They were so small beneath the sky, and yet their hearts must have beaten with the strange realization that they were part of it, that their breath belonged to the same rhythm as the ice, the animals, the stars. And sometimes those shadows advanced into boldness. With spears in hand, they faced creatures far larger than themselves, risking everything to bring down food enough for a band, for a winter. To succeed was survival, to fail was hunger. Yet in that daring lay a seed of confidence that would grow over millennia, the knowledge that fragile beings can stand against giants and sometimes win. But humanity's shadows are not always visible in bones or walls. They also linger in silence, in absence. The artifacts we find today, flint tools, carvings of figures, bone needles, buried shells, are pieces in a puzzle we will never complete. Is it possible entire traditions lived and died upon those plains with no surviving trace? Songs carried only by voice, beliefs written only in ritual, dreams spoken only by fire. Could it be that these invisible inheritances shaped us as deeply as stone and tool, only to be erased by time, like footsteps in melting snow? When we speak of the Ice Age, we say they as if they were other, but their shadow still lies within us. We carry their patience in the way we endure, their fire in the way we invent, their hunger in the way we imagine. We are not separate from their wandering, we are continuation, living proof that shadows can outlast even the longest winters. And yet, the contrast remains. To them, the Ice Age was normal life. To us, it feels almost unimaginable. What we see as trial, they knew as world. Perhaps every age of humanity is this way, ordinary in its now, mysterious in its memory. Thousands of years from now, will someone gaze backward at our cities with the same mixture of wonder and distance, asking how fragile creatures touched towers of stone, how shadows lingered in streets of light? The frozen plains kept their secrets, holding stories in soil and ice, dispersing others to silence. Still, we catch glimpses, paintings deep in caverns, spear points beneath loam, single footprints hardened into ancient mud. They are shadows reaching forward, reminding us that the Ice Age was not only ice, but people, breath, struggle, art, memory. Shadows not erased, but stretched across time, asking us quietly to notice them again. And if these shadows endure so faintly, resting fragile in the present, what about the silence itself? The land shaped, the rivers shifted, the silence born from ice. For the world they walked upon was not still, and its voice still moves beneath even the coldest plains. For the world they walked upon was not still, and its voice still moves beneath even the coldest plains. The great ice sheets carried not only weight but a sound, if silence can be called a sound at all. It was not the silence of emptiness, but of vast presence, a hush so immense that it pressed upon the mind like gravity. Standing at the edge of a glacier, one could hear cracks echo across miles, a deep, thunderous groan of ancient ice adjusting to its own slow motion, and between those fractured moments stretched hours or days, where the only voice was the wind, brushing across the frozen plain like a thought stretched too thin to find words. This silence shaped time itself. In the heart of an Ice Age winter, days felt endless, the sun hanging low, its arc across the horizon hesitant and restrained. To live beneath that light was to feel time sag and lag, as though years were caught in the thick frost of eternity. Yet when the summer arrived, its warmth was sudden and fragile, gone again before hearts had adapted to hope. Time here did not move in even rhythm. It bent with cold, stretched beneath clouds, surged when thawing arrived, collapsed again at the next freeze. To measure such time was not to count days, but to endure seasons that felt like states of being. Glaciers carved this tempo directly into stone. A ridge or valley may look eternal, but its shape is the slowed trace of centuries of motion, rock polished smooth, valleys carved deep, mountains ground away, all patient gestures of ice in silence. Unlike rivers, which announced their presence, glaciers revealed their work only afterward, in stillness. Perhaps this is why their silence feels so profound, because it is not the absence of sound, but the presence of change too slow for the ear to follow. For those who lived near them, the glaciers were more than walls of ice. They were boundaries of being, frontiers at the edge of knowledge. To approach them was to approach an immensity indifferent to human life. In that immensity, people surely felt how tiny they were, how brief, how delicate compared to a sheet of ice that reached from horizon to horizon. And yet, strangely, this awareness of smallness may have also granted them perspective, a reminder that even in silence, the world endures beyond the span of breath. When we touch glaciers today, drilling their cores, measuring their retreat, we witness not only present silence, but past presence. Each flake of snow once fell in a particular moment, drifting from a grey sky, settling on a frozen surface, compacted into memory with countless others. Layer by layer, silence bound itself into time's shape. Now when we hold a piece of ice to the light, we see the geometry of memory itself, bubbles of ancient air glowing faintly, isotopes arranging stories like lines of verse. The silence speaks when read patiently, and yet silence, like time, can be lost. With every degree of warmth, the glaciers recede. Their vast hush gives way to the trickle and rush of rivers, the collapse of cliffs, the tumble of ice into widening seas. New sounds arrive of water flowing, of waves spreading, but the old silence vanishes, leaving us with only its memory. What is the true weight of such a vanishing? Is it only the loss of ice, or the unraveling of a shape of time we can never retrieve? Perhaps silence itself is a species, and like animals of the frozen plains, it too can go extinct. When we imagine the Ice Age, we often picture cold, hunger, endurance, but perhaps its essence was not only in temperature or in survival, it was in silence, in the altered pace of being. It was in the way humans measured their lives not only by beating hearts, but by the hush of snow falling endlessly, by the cracks of ice that marked years instead of moments. Silence was not emptiness, but a presence shared among them. And within that silence, thought may have grown deeper. Stories may have stretched longer. Firelight circles may have filled with voices softer than storms outside. Time bent toward contemplation, because silence had no end in sight. If the glacier is patient, perhaps it taught patience. If the glacier is indifferent, perhaps it taught humility. If the glacier carries silence, perhaps it carried within it the seed of awe. The shape of time itself seemed different beneath the rain of ice, a slower, heavier rhythm, as if centuries were strides instead of steps. To live inside such a rhythm was to grow accustomed to vastness, to feel both the insignificance and the endurance of being. And though the ice sheets are gone from much of the world, perhaps their silence still lingers, carried in stone, in river, in memory. But if glaciers can bend silence into time, what then of the rivers they buried and erased? If sound and stillness were shaped by ice, what happened to the waters forced underground, to the valleys that vanished beneath the frozen weight? What happened to the waters forced underground, to the valleys that vanished beneath the frozen weight? The glaciers did not simply cover the land, they altered its veins, its lifeblood, its secret channels. Where rivers once flowed, they were pressed down, hidden, smothered beneath miles of crushing ice. Some were sealed completely, their courses erased as if they had never been. Others were forced to change path, diverted by the enormous walls of frozen mass, their beds redirected into strange directions we would not recognize today. Beneath the glaciers, rivers often survived, but in another form, meltwater tunneled through blue caverns of ice, carving hidden worlds that no daylight touched. These rivers ran silent through vaulted chambers, carrying with them fine sediment, grinding and smoothing, polishing the surfaces of stone. In secret darkness they flowed, reshaping landscapes in silence, until one day the ice receded, and their scars, long channels and wide basins, remained as evidence of their work. When the ice melted more suddenly, floods of unimaginable force filled the world. Valleys drowned, lakes burst, torrents cascaded down newly exposed land. It is said that entire canyons, which might seem the slow art of thousands of years, may have been torn into being in only a few days of glacial meltwater release. Rivers became avalanches of liquid stone, carrying boulders like pebbles, routing new paths across continents. If we look now at the Columbia River Gorge, at the scablands of Washington, at sudden wide channels cut into earth, we are seeing the handwriting of vanished glaciers, water moving with the violence of silence released all at once. And yet, not all traces are violent. In the hidden floor of valleys once swallowed by ice, scientists find layers of sediment where ancient rivers used to flow, reminders of pathways erased, then recarved anew. Some valleys still conceal their secrets under peat and soil, shallow depressions where rivers once breathed that now lie dormant. What rivers are buried still beneath our feet? What ghost valleys lie sleeping below forests, fields, or even cities? If glaciers erased rivers, they also gave new ones birth. Their retreat left behind waterfalls streaming from cliffs, melt lakes caught between moraines, braided rivers wandering across wide floodplains. Each retreat offered abundance, but also impermanence. For rivers born of glaciers are restless. They flow where the ice allows, shifting endlessly, meandering before finding final courses. Many of our greatest rivers today, the Mississippi, the Rhine, the Thames, the Ganges, owe their character not only to plate tectonics or rainfall, but to the melting of ice, to glaciers that once whispered across their now fertile plains. Close your eyes and see it. A great valley stretching before you, now open, once buried. The rock smoothed as if the hand of time itself had brushed it. Wide U-shaped troughs filled with quiet water reflecting light like a mirror. Lakes dotting the surface, still as memory, where once roaring rivers hid in darkness. Imagine walking across such a valley, knowing that beneath your footsteps is a history of water erased, rewritten, erased again. What if this cycle never ends, that rivers are only temporary sentences written in Earth's language, always subject to being crossed out by the cold hand of ice? And what of the people who came later, long after the glaciers had slipped away? They built villages along rivers carved by ice, unaware that the waters were not eternal but the legacy of erased pasts. They traced myths of deluges, floods that came to drown landscapes suddenly. Could distant legends of great floods echo from these ice-age torrents? Could memory itself in human form carry faint remembrance of valleys abruptly drowned? Perhaps myth is another sediment, deposited story by story, pressed until we forget the first source of the current. And still, the question remains, when an entire river is erased, does it leave any true silence behind, or is its voice carried into the groundwater, into the seas, its memory diffused far beyond its valley? Maybe rivers never truly vanish, they only change shape. What disappears from stone may remain in song, what is erased from land may linger in air. Geologists read these erased rivers not with ears but with evidence. They trace gravel bars left stranded high on cliffs, erratic boulders dropped in improbable places, channels too wide for today's flow. Each clue is a shadow of a ghost river, each scar a reminder of force too vast to stop. In their work, the Ice Age is revealed not only as a time of ice and silence, but of water raging under pressure, of valleys collapsing, of forgotten streams set loose across vanished plains. The buried valleys remind us that landscapes are not permanent. They are stages in passing dramas performed over millions of years. What we call stable ground was once torrent, was once calm, was once erased by the weight of snow. Rivers change, valleys collapse, plains re-emerge from seas. To live here now is to stand only briefly on a chapter of Earth's longer story. And so we return to the silence, wondering if rivers can vanish so completely, unraveling the maps of life itself. What else might erosion conceal? What of entropy, grinding onward in every cycle, shaping even the glaciers themselves from presence to absence? What of entropy, grinding onward in every cycle, shaping even the glaciers themselves from presence to absence? For entropy is not loud, not violent, not immediate. It is the quiet law that everything drifts toward disorder, that structures decay, that patterns unravel, given enough time. The Ice Age may appear to us as permanence, mountains locked in snow, seas withdrawn into frozen vaults, animals moulded to endure thousands of winters. But even such vast icy dominion was only a pause, a fragile arrangement, eventually dissolving like frost in the sun. Entropy was there in every flake of falling snow, each crystal so perfect, so fleeting, destined either to melt or to compress under the weight of others until it fractured and changed. Entropy was there in mammoth herds, in their bones grinding slowly into soil, in their DNA fragmenting into unreadable strands of time. It was there in valleys carved by floods, their sculpted walls collapsing grain by grain. No cycle, no creature, not even the glaciers themselves could outrun it. To the people who lived then, entropy was invisible. They did not name it, but they knew its hand. Fires went out in the night, tools dulled, bodies weakened, shelters collapsed. Nothing remained the same, nothing endured without tending. It must have felt like the nature of existence itself, that things fall apart, not because of failure, but simply because they must. Perhaps in this knowledge grew humility, patience, acceptance, for in their long winters, what else could they do but step gently within the certainty of loss? And yet, entropy is not despair. Its hand also creates. The very cracks in ice allow meltwater to flow. The decay of organic matter returns nutrients to soil. The mixing of seas carries new life across oceans. If the Ice Age had been perfect stillness, it would have been sterile. Life endures because entropy insists on change, and in change lies chance. Could it be that evolution itself, the flowering of species, the rising of intelligence, the birth of story, depends on this constant drift into disorder? When ice sheets retreated, their edges unraveling into meltwater, entropy wrote its signature across the earth. Valleys polished to perfection crumbled at the margins. Cliffs collapsed where glaciers lost their hold. Layers of rock shifted. Moraines crumbled. Gravel spread wide. All of it was evidence that permanence is illusion. The very landscapes we find beautiful for their majesty, the fjords with their deep blue waters, the rolling plains born from flood, are children of entropy disguised as creation. But entropy is more than geology. It is the structure of time itself. In the physics of the universe, it has been said that entropy always increases. That order inevitably drifts toward chaos. From the collapsing of stars into silence to the melting of glaciers into sea, every process bends to this law. And so perhaps the Ice Age can be seen not only as climate, but as one stanza in entropy's endless poem, an expression of energy dispersing slowly, endlessly across the canvas of Earth. Consider the silence of a frozen night. The fire burns low, heat drawing into the air, into the sky, into the universe itself, never to be gathered fully again. That energy is entropy at work, not cruel, not kind, simply certain, and over epochs it pulls at everything, like an unseen tide. Someday even the memory of the Ice Age, carved into stone valleys and written in isotope diaries, will fade. Plates will push upward, seas will cover valleys, mountains will grind to dust. The house of ice will be forgotten, folded into new chapters that entropy writes with calm inevitability. And yet, there is wonder in this forgetting. For if nothing remained the same, then each moment carries unique existence, never to be repeated. Every breath of a mammoth, every spark from a human fire, every crack across the surface of ice, none of it returns, all of it singular. To recognize entropy is to recognize wonder that fragility is the very condition that makes being precious. Perhaps this is why standing among glaciers moves us so deeply. We sense their impermanence hidden behind apparent strength. We know, even if softly, that they too are falling apart, moment by moment, atom by atom. Their weight, their power, their silence is not denial of entropy, but proof of it. And if glaciers are temporary, then so are we. So what then remains? What lingers even after entropy does its work? Is it memory? Is it story? Is it the echo of rivers erased and animals vanished, still resurfacing in the imagination of descendants? Maybe what entropy erodes in matter persists faintly in thought. Maybe that is why we search, why we dig, why we dream of lost rivers and buried shadows, because the hand of entropy can never erase entirely our need to remember. And if memory clings where matter collapses, perhaps the next step is to follow those remnants, to seek what could have been preserved even in ruin. For ice may vanish, but sometimes it preserves within itself the strangest relics of life, the bodies of creatures, the fragments of civilizations, the artifacts carried beneath frozen tides. For ice may vanish, but sometimes it preserves within itself the strangest relics of life, the bodies of creatures, the fragments of civilizations, the artifacts carried beneath frozen tides. The glacier is not only sculptor and eraser, it is also archive, a cold museum of accidents, where time collapses into stillness and objects endure far beyond their natural span. A mammoth can sleep for 40,000 years in permafrost, its hair and flesh intact, its blood cells still visible under the lens of a microscope, as though it had wandered the plains only yesterday. But if such a creature can endure in ice, what else might wait hidden, sealed into the snow? The word some whisper is techno-fossil. A fossil not of bone or shell but of technology, of things crafted by intelligence, objects not born of nature but of thought. We know them in our world today, the plastics that drift across seas, the concrete that builds our cities, the alloys forged from fire. If abandoned, these would one day sink into strata, embedding themselves into stone, marking our presence long after our voices fade. But what if such fossils already exist in the past? What if, beneath the ice or locked into old soils exposed by glacial retreat, clues of forgotten hands lie waiting? The idea is not impossible, only unsettling. For if humans crossing the frozen plains left carvings on stone and ochre paintings on walls, why could not another people, long before them, have left similar fragments? Civilizations could rise and fall unseen if they lived in times when the sea stood lower, when exposed plains now drowned were their home, when ice melted, their villages, their tools, their fragile traces might have been swallowed whole beneath oceans, erased from map and memory alike. Even so, glaciers may have noticed, for ice is indifferent but meticulous. It swallows everything in its path, a bead of worked metal, a chipped blade, a carved symbol, even a spark of pigment could be carried forward, buried deep, compressed in silence. We have found only shards belonging to those we acknowledge, flint, ivory, clay, but what other materials have been locked away, awaiting their uneven return? Could some relic of another kind sleep within ice, waiting in darkness until the next thaw reveals it? Scientists speak with caution, for proof is absent, and yet the possibilities tempt us. Strange objects discovered in strata, anomalous artifacts that do not quite belong, debated and dismissed, yet never entirely forgotten. If ice can retain a mammoth's eyelash, could it retain the trace of something made, something imagined, something deliberately shaped? What if beneath the Greenland ice lies not only climate diaries, but lost chapters of human, or almost human, history never recorded? The techno-fossil is more than speculation. It is a way of thinking about deep time, of seeing ourselves through the lens of impermanence. For we too are creating museums for the future without meaning to. Plastic will outlast us. Nuclear residues will endure in the soil like strange isotopic signatures calling through ages. Bits of our story may outlast the bones of our own species. We ourselves are becoming techno-fossils, destined to lie in some future record as silent testimony of Anthropocene life. But within the Ice Age, the thought becomes more haunting. To imagine a techno-fossil beneath the snow is to imagine another kind of ancestor, perhaps not human as we know it, perhaps human in ways we can no longer even picture. Did they rise in warm interglacials and fall into silence under advancing ice? Did they scatter their fragments across plains that are seas now? Or did the slow press of glaciers erase them, not even leaving stone memory, but of metal or of shapes beyond our grasp? We do not know, perhaps we never will. Yet the thought remains, a shadow scratching gently at the silence. What if we are not the first? The glaciers whisper possibility. In their melt they reveal bones, pollen, ancient seeds, tools once carried by nomadic hands. Each artifact feels small, yet behind every small fragment lies a vast absence, a vanished life. And one wonders if these tiny traces remain, then how much is gone altogether, lives and languages lost to the relentless storage of ice, now recovered only in silence. Close your eyes and picture a future thaw. A glacier retreats into silence, its meltwater spilling into rivers. Beneath the collapsing wall of ice, something emerges, not natural but carefully made, its edges sharp, its material defying immediate recognition. We hold it in our hands, and in its weight lies the chill of realization. History is deeper, stranger, more layered than we ever believed. And if such a thing has not yet been found, is that evidence of absence, or only evidence of patience required? Perhaps the glaciers have not finished speaking. Perhaps what they hold has not yet been revealed. We must remember their silence is not emptiness. It is postponement. The concept of the techno-fossil leads us to ask not only what might have come before, but what will follow. Will our own monuments be carried beneath ice in ages yet to come? Will future species, millions of years away, find fragments of plastic or steel pressed into stone, wondering about the shadows who left them? Entropy ensures our voices will vanish in flesh, but artifacts remain, compressed, transformed, enduring blindly like shells in fossil beds. So the Ice Age teaches in its own way. Memory is selective, and survival is rarely fair. The mammoth may vanish, but its hair remains. A civilization may vanish, but its fragments may still stand, anonymous, inexplicable, without story. Perhaps this is the true ache of technofossils, not proof of survival, but estrangement, objects divorced from meaning, leaving only absence where explanation should be. And if the ice can hold bodies and beads, bones and seeds, then perhaps in its next yielding it may return to us something altogether unexpected, something that unsettles in its silence, something that makes us remember how fragile our maps of history are. For if glaciers are vaults, then their unlocking may yet show us histories we never dreamed existed. But if the frozen earth can retain even fragments of lost time, then what of dust, that quieter, finer archive, drifting across centuries unseen? Then what of dust, that quieter, finer archive, drifting across centuries unseen? Ice may preserve relics in grand stillness, but dust moves unseen through air, across desert, over sea. It is the subtle messenger carrying fragments of places to lands far beyond their borders. Unlike stone, unlike bone, dust does not wait. It travels, it hovers, it infiltrates sky and water, breathing silent testimony of vanished worlds. During the Ice Age, the wind carried more dust than at almost any other time in Earth's story. Cold sharpened the deserts. Glaciers scraped continents into powder finer than ash, and the winds lifted these grains into the atmosphere, Each speck was born of erosion. Mountains ground into whispers, riverbeds turned skeletal under dry skies, plains scoured clean of vegetation. Every grain of dust was once part of something larger, a rock, a soil, a forest floor, and in its fragment, the memory of whole landscapes flew. Dust drifted outward for thousands of miles, settling across oceans, building thin layers in the most distant corners of Earth. In Greenlandic ice, pale threads of Saharan dust reveal themselves, carried across the sea and frozen into place. In Antarctic cores, pulses of iron-rich sediment tell us of faraway continents crumbling under drought. Each particle is a letter in Earth's airborne correspondence, messages carried quietly by the wind, and because dust does not decay in the same way as story or song, it endures. It waits in layers, in sediments, in ice records, in soils where it falls softly year after year. Scientific eyes read dust just as carefully as isotopes. Its chemistry tells us of climate shifts, of deserts waxing and waning, of forests pushing forward or pulling back. In times of intense cold, the dust was heavy, thick in its travel, cloaking skies, dimming sunlight. Pale, frozen plains were not merely white but streaked with the sepia veil of drifting earth. Sometimes snow fell tinged with foreign color, red, gold, even brown, when the winds reached far enough to carry deserts into frost. Could those who lived then have noticed the strangeness, looking upward at a sky blurred by distant lands? Dust was not only a record, it was sustenance. Iron particles carried from eroding mountains seeded the seas, feeding plankton blooms that in turn nourished entire chains of life across the oceans. Without dust, life may have starved in its cold seas. With it, the smallest beings grew in number, and whales and fish followed, their migrations tied to the unseen gift of drifting grains. This paradox, the smallest fragments ensuring the survival of the largest, was another reminder that fragility holds weight in Earth's balance. And among humans, dust was a familiar companion. It clung to fur wrappings, it filled lungs, it veiled horizons. Hunters crossing plains watched their fires dim when dust coiled in the air. Travelers coughed into their furs as winds swept grit across frozen fields. Even in caves, black pigments they crushed into paint were powders, not unlike dust itself, ground, carried, blown into the shapes of animals on stone walls. Dust was both nuisance and inheritance, part of daily breath, part of the story they marked. But dust is also forgetting. It settles over what once was, obscuring, concealing, softening edges into vague outlines. Entire villages, entire paths could be erased by drifts of soil blown from elsewhere. What was once sharp became smooth. What was once distinct became muted. Dust does not shout. It hushes. It turns presence into silence so gently we may not even notice until years or centuries later. Perhaps entropy has no better servant than dust, working patiently, invisibly across the face of time. Even now, dust travels ceaselessly. Sahara storms cloud the Caribbean. Ash from distant volcanoes hangs in sunsets half a world away. The forests we breathe in spring are laced with pollen that travelled by air like ancient dust once did. To live on Earth is always to live among witnesses too small to see, to breathe in the fragments of other lands, other centuries. Each inhalation carries with it lives and deaths, fragments and endings, scattered across the unseen corridors of sky. And if dust moves through wind, memory moves through dust. In each speck may lie a hint of vanished rainforests, the record of ancient drought, the cry of broken landscapes now held only in powder. Could it be that, in breathing, we take into ourselves fragments of the past, reincarnations of soils that supported forests long gone? Perhaps in our breath we carry more history than we realize, a gentle dusting of eternity traveling with us always. The glaciers remembered in ice, the deserts remembered in dust. Both tell the story of silence moving, shifting, erasing, carrying, and yet dust is never still. If ice is the vault that holds, then dust is the messenger that wanders, taking memory where it was never meant to be. But if both vault and messenger drift through time, what then of the ocean, the third archive where memory sinks, layer upon layer, into sediments that deepen like pages? What then of the ocean, the third archive where memory sinks, layer upon layer, into sediments that deepen like pages? While glaciers preserve air and dust carries messages across the wind, the ocean chooses another way. It writes in depth. Every grain that settles, every shell that falls, every whisper of clay drifting to the seafloor becomes a line in its quiet ledger. Over thousands, over millions of years, these layers grow, pressed by weight, concealed by darkness, waiting for someone to read their story. The ocean does not rush to remember. Its record is patient, collecting what the world forgets. Bones of plankton fall slowly through water like snow. The smallest shells, unseen by ancient eyes, descend one after another until they become entire limestone mountains long after their makers vanished. Volcanic ash falls into waves, spreading thin grey blankets on the seafloor. Fragments of continents eroded by rivers flow outward, drifting in clouds before settling to join this silent archive. Even the faint scattering of dust that travelled from frozen plains finds its way here, sinking through stillness into accumulation. And so the ocean remembers not in sudden revelations, but in endless layers of forgetting transformed into permanence. Scientists bore deep into these sediments, just as they bore into ice. In the darkness of retrieved cores, they find foraminifera, the tiny shells of once living organisms, fragile but precise. Inside the chemistry of these shells lies an echo of water temperature, of salinity, of atmospheric carbon. Ratios of oxygen isotopes tell us when seas warmed and when they cooled, when glaciers grew tall and when they crumbled into the waves. These creatures are long gone, yet their bodies write with honesty, leaving behind no story but what chemistry itself conveys. Here the ocean's diary is continuous, without firelight or ritual, impartial yet immense. But there is another voice hidden deeper still. As tectonic plates move, as seafloor spreads and subducts, much of this record is dragged downward into heat, erased into mantle, recycled in volcanic fire. Even the ocean forgets. Its memory is vast but not endless. Some pages are consumed, rewritten, broken apart into molten oblivion. If ice forgets by melting, if dust forgets by scattering, the ocean forgets by swallowing its archive whole. One more reminder that nothing remains untouched by entropy's hand. Yet for the years it remains, the ocean's remembrance is profound. It tells of sudden floods when glacial lakes burst and drained into seas, raising water across the world. It tells of mass extinctions, when shells ceased to fall in numbers they once did. It tells of warmth and cold, expansion and contraction, storms and stillness. It even tells of life invisible to the naked eye, life we never knew existed until cores revealed their presence. Perhaps the truest map of Earth is not found on its surface, but beneath the weight of waves in the sediments where all fragments someday come to rest. Close your eyes and imagine yourself beneath that water, not in the bright shallows, but in the abyss, where the world falls quiet, where the pressure deepens, where light itself gives way. Here the floor of the ocean is not barren. It is a vast library with shelves built of silt and clay, of sand and ash, all arranged by gravity, all bound by time. Picture your hand brushing across a core of sediment, its grey lightless form harbouring secrets so fragile, so precise, measured not in centuries but in hundreds of thousands of years. The pages are not written for us, and yet we can read them. And what does it mean that we can read? That by sampling a shell, by measuring an isotope, by tracing the faint memory in mud, we reach across time to embrace what no human eye ever witnessed. We see the seas before we were here. We hear the rhythms of Earth before memory learned to speak. Could it be that the ocean remembers more faithfully than any living being, yet without intention, without awareness, only because forgetting is never complete? But the ocean does more than remember. It also whispers forward. Its currents carry warmth from equator to pole, shaping the skeleton of climate that decides whether continents freeze or soften. Its tides carve and erode, reshaping coasts at a rhythm closer to breath than to stone. The memory of the past is carried into the present, always flowing onward, shaping each new page as it deposits the next layer of silt. And still, one wonders what else could be hidden, irretrievable, in those depths. If civilizations once stood where seas later rose, whole continents of memory now lie drowned. The ocean remembers them too, but differently, not as preserved relics, but as absence, as silence layered deep beneath more silence. Could it be that some memories can only be lost, their weight present only in the gravity of what does not return? The ocean's remembrance is strange in this way. It is both the most honest diary and the most ruthless eraser. It holds for a while, then drags downward, burying until memory becomes stone, and stone itself returns to fire. And yet we still listen. We still ask. For even incomplete, even broken, the ocean remembers more than we can ever hold. And so, as we hear its silence, we turn our attention from water and sediment to another element entirely, the fire beneath, the volcanic heart that shapes ice and sea alike. For what happens when the heat of Earth itself rises to meet the frozen skin of the Ice Age? What happens when the heat of Earth itself rises to meet the frozen skin of the Ice Age? Beneath the white silence of glaciers, beneath the endless frost of tundra, the Earth had not grown still. Its molten heart continued to beat, its fires rising through fractures, its breath of ash and lava reaching for the sky. Ice ruled the surface, yet fire lived just below, and when the two collided, landscapes were changed in sudden violent whispers. Volcanoes erupted in the middle of this frozen age, their black plumes staining pale skies. Instead of comforting warmth, fire brought shadow, clouds of ash veiled the sun, snow fell thicker, darkness lengthened, and yet in other places, heat melted pathways through ice. Subglacial eruptions boiled meltwater beneath sheets miles thick, creating vast hidden lakes that pressed upward, waiting for release. When they surged, they carried force enough to carve valleys in days, reshaping lands that seemed eternal. Thus the Ice Age was sculpted not only by frozen stillness, but by bursts of flame, two opposite forces entangled in patient struggle. In Iceland, in Antarctica, even now beneath Greenland, scientists trace these fire and ice encounters. They find ash layers preserved in ancient ice cores, black stripes separating white centuries. Each dark band tells of a moment when Earth bared its fire through frozen breath, reminding the surface that silence is never complete. Volcanic glass, frozen into layers of ice, reveals eruptions so vast their echoes spread across hemispheres. Some of these events may have triggered centuries of cold that followed. Others may have left brief seasons of warmth, fed by gases rising into the sky. Imagine the sound: glacier cracking, lava hissing as it meets meltwater, great plumes of steam exploding into the sky. To live nearby was to watch the impossible, a world both burning and freezing, elements that should never mingle forced stubbornly together. Perhaps people who saw it felt they were witnessing more than nature, but stories greater than themselves. Fire seemed eternal, ice seemed eternal, and yet both were fragile in each other's hands. In quiet moments after eruption, landscapes transformed, black basalt cooled beside ridges of white snow. New islands emerged where there were none before, volcanic newborns standing in seas threaded by icebergs. These newborn coasts, steaming against the sky, were reminders of Earth's deep restlessness. To humans wandering close, they must have seemed like thresholds to another world. What stories were told as people watched fires glow against frozen land? What awe rose in their hearts at the sight of ice melting under night flames, rivers forming where silence had reigned? Even extinction was touched by this rivalry. Some scientists wonder if great volcanic winters, layered over glacial cold, pressured species toward vanishing. Did a herd starve not only from frost, but from ash choking its grasses? Did predators grow weaker when prey faltered, when the food chain trembled under the hand of fire? We can only imagine the countless small endings carried on the steam of eruption, but also countless survivals, plants regrowing from volcanic soil richer than before, animals grazing on meadows born from fire itself. Yet there is strangeness in this paradox. Fire seems alive, ice seems lifeless, yet both shaped the stories of living beings. Fire erases quickly, violently, but also nourishes soil. Ice erases slowly, silently, but also preserves. Between them, history shuttles back and forth, torn and rewritten, destroyed and remembered. Could it be that memory itself depends on such contrasts, on forgetting that clears space, on remembering that traps fragments in stillness? Perhaps without fire and ice together, the earth would offer less meaning, fewer questions to wonder at in the silence of night. Close your eyes and picture the edge of one such meeting, a glacier descending from mountain heights, a volcanic crater smoking nearby. Between them runs a river of melt, boiling at its source, cooling into ice no farther than a mile away. The landscape feels unfinished, not harmonious but alive with contradiction, as though creation itself is ongoing and unstable. And maybe that is the truest state of the earth. Not balance, but movement between extremes, a tension that keeps the story unfolding. Fire at the edge of ice leaves a mark deeper than stone. It leaves us wondering how forces so opposed can coexist, and how life, tiny and soft, endured between them. And as the smoke of these ancient encounters drifted into the cold skies, as ashes settled into ice and became new pages of memory, they set the stage for endings that rippled outward, extinctions that followed, silences that deepened. For in the retreating echoes of volcanic fire and glacial silence, we arrive at the fading roars, the echo of extinction itself. For in the retreating echoes of volcanic fire and glacial silence, we arrive at the fading roars, the echo of extinction itself. It was not sudden thunder, not the loud collapse of a world ending all at once, but a hush that lengthened, a fading of voices herd by herd, species by species, until the vast chorus of Ice Age life dimmed to a quieter hum. Extinction, in truth, often sounds less like catastrophe and more like absence. The silence left behind when footsteps no longer press the snow, when shadows no longer move at the horizon. The mammoths remained long after the glaciers began to retreat, but their herds thinned across the continents. Once they marched like forests, tusks gleaming in the pale light as they searched endlessly for grass across frozen plains. Slowly the forests returned, the plains contracted, their range shrank, and their voices weakened. On islands at the edge of Siberia, small populations lingered, reduced in size yet still mammoth in spirit, holding on for thousands of years longer than their mainland kin. Imagine the last of them, trumpeting into winds that no longer carried the answering call of companions. Is extinction not only physical loss, but also the loneliness of the last voice, fading unheard? The saber-toothed cats, with their great curved fangs, prowled across the Americas for millennia, kings of frozen plains. But prey dwindled, and ice gave way to woodland. Their bodies, built for strength, were less suited to the narrower shadowed world that followed. They slipped quietly into memory, their bones left in tar pits and caves, each fang a relic of power without present use. The giant short-faced bear and the cave lion followed, vast predators gone like sudden dreams, leaving descendants smaller, transformed, adapted. Even among birds, extinction left its trace. Great flightless birds that once strode across open grasslands found no home when the land closed into forest. The echo of their disappearance reaches us faintly through scattered bones, hollow reminders of wings that never flew. The ground sloths of South America, creatures as vast as trees, faded too, lumbering shadows gone as plant life shifted around them. Their immensity was their tragedy. Their strength could not protect them from the slow change of climate. nor the sharp persistence of human hunters moving among them. The causes of extinction remain debated, even whispered in uncertainty between scientists today. Was it the rise of us, the relentless persistence of hunters spreading fire across plains, closing every migration path? Or was it the climate, quickening its stride, reshaping food, drawing habitats into unfamiliar forms? Most likely it was both, entwined together, neither enemy alone but a convergence too heavy to survive. Ice withdrew from the world, but with it withdrew the cold plains that had fed the great herds. Warmth returned, but those adapted to cold could not follow into the new. Extinction rarely happens at once. It begins with narrowing, habitats shrink, ranges contract, the young survive less often. Herds become scattered, smaller, songs and calls grow faint as numbers dwindle. Each winter harder, each summer shorter of resource, until at last only silence remains. If you listened closely, perhaps you would not hear a collapse, but only a pause, 1 year with fewer animals, another with none. Silence has a way of disguising itself, making absence seem gradual, almost invisible. Yet invisibility does not diminish weight. Extinction shaped the Ice Age as much as glaciers and fire. In every vanished species, ecosystems twisted, balances shifted, new opportunities emerged. When mammoths vanished, grasses marched unchecked, forests crept north. When great predators fell silent, the animals they once shaped through fear and balance spread in different ways. Absence, too, sculpts landscapes. Extinction leaves not only void but transformation. And still one feels the ache. To imagine a mammoth herd moving beneath auroras, to picture lions stronger than any alive today, is to touch wonder, and then to picture their end. An end not written, unmarked, only silence, invites a different feeling, humility. How fragile even giants prove to be, how time bends all, no matter how immense, toward quiet. Extinction echoes forward as much as it echoes back. It warns us. It shows that climates shape life relentlessly, that human movement carries weight in silence, that no abundance is forever. Could it be that the Ice Age extinctions are not ancient history, but a mirror we face today, as species slip from the world in rhythms we barely notice? The echo grows louder in our own time, disguised in the same hush, the same near invisibility, yet carrying the same truth that absence is building around us, grain by grain, shadow by shadow. Close your eyes and listen. Extinction has no roar. It is the absence of hoofbeat, the empty sky where wings once turned, the silence of a cave wall when the animal painted there no longer roams outside. These echoes do not fade completely. They linger in our imaginations, in the DNA of surviving kin, in the faint restless questions we continue to ask. What was it like? What have we lost? What might return only in memory? And so extinction becomes not only death but story. The cave paintings preserve not only the appearance of bison and mammoth, but their presence, their weight, their importance in lives now blurred by centuries. Story is resistance to erasure, the human attempt to hold an echo against the hand of entropy. Whether in pigment, in bone, or in silence, the echo of extinction remains, haunting with a quiet persistence. But if silence could erase even giants, what of life that walked more delicately? What of the forests that shifted, recoiled, and endured under the hand of ice, waiting with unfamiliar patience for warmth to return? What of the forests that shifted, recoiled, and endured under the hand of ice, waiting with unfamiliar patience for warmth to return? For trees, unlike herds, cannot wander quickly. Their migrations span not footsteps, but seeds carried by wind, by birds, by time itself. And yet during the long reach of the Ice Age, even the forests moved, trembling under the slow advance of cold, trembling not with sound but with retreat. Where glaciers pressed southward, forests bent away, withdrawing into pockets of survival. Oaks and pines, birches and willows shrank into southern valleys, clinging to shelter wherever climate allowed. The vast green canopies of Europe, once rich and broad, collapsed into fragmented groves near the Mediterranean. In North America, hardwood giants crept south of the ice, confined to narrow bands along rivers where frost could not bury them completely. Each tree that survived became a memory keeper, a small remnant of once wider forests. To stand in one of those refuges would have been to feel fragility all around, the canopy thin, the diversity sparse, each tree a survivor of silence and patience. Seeds fell, but few took root. Cold seasons grew heavy, years shortened into slow endurance, and yet, within their stillness, the forests endured. They held breath. They waited, for trees understand time differently from us, not in heartbeats, not even in lifetimes, but in cycles of centuries, in rhythms too vast to hurry. Could it be that the forests in retreat were also teaching us that survival is sometimes less about conquering and more about enduring quietly until change arrives? Pollen records drawn from deep sediments reveal this migration with precision. Scientists trace the waxing and waning of tree species through grains invisible to the eye. In each pollen grain lies a signature, the identity of a tree, a record of a forest once breathing in a place now bare. With these traces we map ancient woodlands, watching them move across continents as the pulse of cold and warmth dictated their survival. Forests may not speak, but they leave these tiny diaries behind, carried on air, laid gently into mud and lake bed, holding memory more patient than stone. Some plants adapted differently. Grasses spread northward, thriving in open plains where trees could not follow. Shrubs tugged at the margins of ice, hardy and resilient in climates that would unmake greater trees. And in tundra where soil barely thawed, lichens and mosses spread carpets of muted color, creating the groundwork that would one day allow seeds to return. Survival may shift in shape, but it continues, even when fractured into the smallest forms. Yet the return was as mysterious as the retreat. As the glaciers melted, as warmth crept back with hesitant promise, forests surged outward once more. Oaks reclaimed river valleys, pines pressed into new terrain, birches marked the front lines of warmth. What must it have been like, this slow green tide spreading back across continents? To the animals, it meant migrations altered, hostile plains softened into grazing grounds, shadowed woodlands grew thick again. To us it meant firewood closer at hand, shelter stronger, resources deeper. Forests were both stage and companion, lost to cold but never wholly gone. Imagine yourself beneath those early returning canopies, the air filled with scent of sap and soil, after centuries of cold silence, the sun scattered differently, filtered through green rather than white. Birdsong returned where only wind's howl had been. For thousands of years humanity must have watched these changes, not as stories of climate, but as transformations in their daily lives. Each child likely grew up with more trees than the one before, each generation feeling the world soften slightly, as though the earth itself had remembered how to breathe again. But in retreating and returning, forests remind us of impermanence. They too can vanish. They too are subject to climate's hand, to ice's pressure, to entropy creeping through soil. Their shivering in the ice age was not a mistake, but a rhythm, survival shaped by patience. Perhaps that is why forests feel so ancient to us. We sense that their stillness holds centuries of waiting, centuries of endurance. And if forests could shrink into fragments but return again to fullness, what does this suggest of memory itself? That forgetting is never total, that silence can pass but leave seeds ready to sprout at the first sign of warmth. Memory too may shiver, collapse, retreat into dark places, but it can also return, stronger, re-rooting itself despite the apparent erasure of time. Yet even as forests reclaimed land from ice, another kind of memory was unfolding elsewhere, frozen in the glaciers themselves. For ice not only remembers the past, it also teaches us about forgetting, about how time compresses layers until distinction blurs. What if glaciers hold not only climates, but the very shape of memory itself? What if glaciers hold not only climates, but the very shape of memory itself? For glaciers are more than frozen water. They are pages layered upon pages, memory pressed into silence. Each flake of snow begins as a moment, a whisper in the sky, drifting quietly to earth. Alone it is fragile, destined to vanish in sunlight. But when countless flakes fall, compact and merge, they become something larger, a collective record of seasons, each layer compressed into a translucent chapter. Time itself seems to gather there, not flowing but stacked. In that sense, glaciers are like memory. Each experience drifts down, fragile, forgettable. One moment is lost but layered together. Moments form something harder to erase, a history of the self, a continuity of being. And yet, like glaciers, this accumulation is never perfect. Pressure pushes downward, layers beneath are crushed, compressed, blurred. What was once sharp distinction becomes indistinct pattern, yesterday blending into last year folding into last century. Memory collapses into impression, into texture, into weight. Nothing is lost entirely, perhaps, but nothing is kept intact either. When scientists draw cores from ice, they seek this paradox. Voices whisper from bubbles of ancient air, carbon dioxide capturing warmth's presence, oxygen isotopes recalling temperature, volcanic ash recording explosions. Yet the deeper they drill, the less precise the memory becomes. Annual snowfall merges, whole centuries fold together like pressed leaves, beautiful but indistinguishable. The glacier remembers, but imperfectly. It teaches us that remembering and forgetting are not opposites but companions. For to remember is also to blur, and to forget is also to transform memory into something new. Perhaps this is why glaciers move us so deeply when we stand before them. They are memory incarnate, vast, layered, majestic, but inevitably vanishing. To walk across a glacier is to walk across thousands of years we can no longer separate, footsteps upon a surface that hides the long weight of past winters. Beneath lies memory, above lies forgetting, bound together, inseparable. And does this not mirror the way our minds hold history? We remember fragments, the silhouette of a mammoth drawn by firelight, the echo of bison hooves, the equation of isotopes, but most is forgotten. Humanity's Ice Age story is filled with gaps no archaeologist can fill, no fossil can restore. Do we mourn those gaps? Or do we accept that forgetting is the form memory always takes over long spans of time? Could it be that meaning lives not in precise recollection, but in the blending, the impression, the soft persistence of something that cannot be erased, but also cannot be clearly named? There is poetry in the way glaciers forget. They hold on, but only for a while. Eventually warmth comes, meltwater seeps, strata collapse. A core taken from Greenland tells one story for 100,000 years, then nothing afterward. The ice is gone, the diary ended. This is not cruelty, but inevitability. Ice is never forever, and yet, while it lasts, it gives us magnificent glimpses, reminders that the Earth itself has a memory we are only beginning to read. Imagine pressing your hand against such a glacier. The surface feels cold, but beneath you is a cathedral of time, an immense record kept in silence, and still your hand cannot feel all those layers, cannot sense the distinct years within. You only feel something steady and vast, a single surface. This is how memory often feels, immense in depth, impossible in clarity. When we try to touch one specific moment, the whole weight presses back instead. And perhaps the glacier also teaches us of fragility, for its memory is vulnerable not only to warmth, but to its own weight pressed farther down. Molecules realign, details lose shape. Too much time destroys precision. Too much passage folds memory into generality. In this, ice seems to echo our own minds, where early years blur, where memories older than a lifetime become indistinct myth, softened by pressure into something that feels true though details vanish. Some memories, though, do survive sharper: a volcanic eruption etched in ash, a sudden warm period carved in isotope, a catastrophe frozen into preserved clarity. These stand out like dreams more vivid than life, moments that survive the compression of centuries. And so we realize that glaciers, like us, do not recall every moment equally. Some experiences carve deeper, resist erasure, demand remembrance even when surrounded by blur. Close your eyes and picture this: a glacier calving into the sea, 1,000,000 tons collapsing in thunder. What was ancient diary becomes meltwater, becomes tide, becomes absence. The memory dissolves, disappears, and yet even now fragments remain: the stones the glacier carried, the valleys it carved, the sediments it left as its retreating footprint. Forgetting in one form is remembering in another. Memory does not vanish, it only changes medium. So glaciers remind us: there is no remembering without forgetting, no preservation without erasure. Everything we study in them, every bubble of air, every isotope, is a glimpse of this fragile balance. And the more we listen, the more the question grows: if glaciers are keepers of memory, what then of the sky above them, the frozen light that lingered and bent across such a world? Could the heavens, too, have carried their own secret diaries in pale, shivering light? Could the heavens, too, have carried their own secret diaries in pale, shivering light? For as the glaciers pressed across continents and forests, withdrew into patience, the sky above was altered as well. The Ice Age did not stop at the ground. It bent the very light that touched it. The air grew colder, drier, clearer. Moisture was thin, clouds sharper, winds stretched across vast plains that no longer bore heavy forests. And so the skyscape of the Ice Age was not the same as ours. It too wrote memory in colors, in arcs, in light bent over endless white horizons. Sunlight scattered differently then. The low angle of the sun in long winters meant shadows stretched across days. Where snow lay thick, its whiteness turned the glare into brilliance, until each glance could dazzle the eyes, filling every surface with brightness that felt eternal. And in that refracted glare, subtle halos appeared, rings of pale fire circling the sun, created by ice crystals whispering through the cold air. At night the moon wore its own halos, muted arcs surrounding its silver form, as though every celestial body was crowned by frost. Perhaps to those who stared upward then, the heavens seemed alive, framed always within the geometry of cold. And the auroras, the northern and southern lights, danced far more often in those charged skies. The shifting magnetic field of the earth, the solar winds meeting atmosphere, created veils of moving green, blue, and crimson. Curtains of living light fell across the horizon in silence, shimmering above mammoth herds, above footprints pressed into snow, above fires flickering in caves. To lie beneath such a display was to feel that the sky itself was breathing with the earth, the heavens mirroring the frozen motions below. What stories did the first humans tell, staring upward at curtains of color flowing through the night? Did they imagine gods, spirits, pathways of the dead, or did they simply sit in awe, accepting that the world above was as mysterious as the one below? Even the stars themselves seemed closer. In the clarity of Ice Age air, free from haze, free from smoke, without cities to veil them, the night must have been overwhelming, millions upon millions of points burning in silence. The Milky Way would not have been a faint arc but a radiant river stretching across the firmament, its countless sparks enough to fill the sky edge to edge. We forget, in our own lives, how immense and overwhelming the night once was. For those ancient eyes, the stars were not background. They were presence, intimate, insistent. In their memories, the sky was not an idea, not a science, but a vast canvas pressing down upon every dream. The Ice Age sky was not only beauty, it was also a clock. People learned to watch its rhythms, marking the slow tilt of constellations, the arc of the sun, the shifting proportions of day and night. Time was measured by fire, yes, by hunger, yes, but also by sky. Stars marked seasons, dawns marked migrations. The low sun in endless winter reminded them of patience. In the silence of frozen nights, perhaps the sky was their most faithful teacher, mapping cycles they did not yet name, whispering promises of change hidden in the dark. We can imagine a child, lying beyond a cave's edge, wrapped against the cold, staring upward while elders tended the fire. Above, a ribbon of green aurora spills its shifting shimmer across blackness. Beyond it, stars crowd in endless ranks. Around that child, mammoths sleep in the distance, wolves prowl in silence, the land holds its breath. In that moment the child is not merely watching, they are joining something larger, feeling their life stretched into the immensity above. Such nights must have planted the seeds of wonder, of story, of the deep suspicion that sky and self are somehow entwined. And these skies, magnificent yet strange, may have shaped imagination as much as the land did. When light refracts into halos, when stars crowd without number, when auroras speak in silent color, how could early humans not believe that the heavens carried messages? Perhaps the myths that survive today are the softened echoes of Ice Age skies, tales born not only around fire, but beneath curtains of ghostly light. The cosmos did not just watch over them, it participated, glowing, shimmering, reminding them that they were never alone under the pale immensity. And so the Ice Age sky becomes another archive, though this one cannot be drilled or sampled. Its records are found only in pigment on stone walls, in stories passed down, in our enduring awe at auroras, halos, eclipses and stars. Its memory is ephemeral, softer even than dust, lasting only so long as we remember to look up. But if the sky carried its silent diary of light, and the valleys and glaciers shaped by time held their own, how then did these shifting landscapes connect? What bridges of land and history were revealed when oceans fell and continents kissed beneath the low Ice Age tide? How then did these shifting landscapes connect? What bridges of land and history were revealed when oceans fell and continents kissed beneath the low Ice Age tide? The water that fled to the vaults of glaciers left more behind than emptiness. It revealed pathways, where today the ocean lies deep and restless. Then the seafloor stood naked beneath the pale sun, stretching like corridors of possibility that linked worlds once separate. These land bridges were more than geography. They were thresholds, delicate doors briefly opened by the breathing of ice. Through them herds passed, forests spread, and human footsteps traced slow routes toward futures they could not have imagined. The most famous of these thresholds lay between Siberia and Alaska, a narrow but immense bridge across what we now call the Bering Strait. Lowered seas revealed a plain hundreds of miles wide, covered not by water but by grassland, rich with grazing herds. Mammoth, reindeer, bison, elk, and even predators like lions and wolves walked its breadth, and behind them, following cautiously, came humans, their silhouettes against the snow carrying fire, tools, memory. Perhaps they did not know they were crossing into another hemisphere. Perhaps to them it was only another path after herds, another horizon. And yet, in those footsteps, continents were joined not just by land, but by story. Around the world, other secret doors opened. The North Sea, now flooding between Britain and Europe, was once a vast lowland plain, Doggerland, green, fertile, threaded with rivers. Families lived there, fished its waters, hunted its herds. Somewhere beneath the rolling waves of today still lie the traces of a land lost, entire forests drowned, valleys sealed in silence beneath the North Sea's tides. Elsewhere in Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf turned islands into a single continent. Borneo, Sumatra, Java, and the Malay Peninsula, unified by shallow plains now hidden below the waves. Australia and New Guinea were joined as one. In the Caribbean, chains of islands linked, reshaping coasts and offering passage. The earth had remade itself, and what we know as sea was then soil. What we know as distance was then a road. Imagine standing on one of those bridges, looking out over what today seems unimaginable, a plain where there is now only water. Beneath your feet lies mud, cracked by frost, grasses bending in pale wind, scattered herds grazing unaware of what margins they cross. The horizon stretches open, no coastline to stop it, as though the world itself had lengthened. To us, these vanished lands feel mythical, but to those who lived then, they were ordinary, practical, part of life. Migration routes, campgrounds, home. Could it be that many human stories were born precisely because of these bridges? That mythologies of crossing, of boundary, of threshold, arise from the memory of these journeys? Rivers were not the only paths. Whole landmasses guided movement, shifting the course of history with the simplest fact of lowered sea level. If the Bering Bridge had not existed, the peopling of the Americas may never have unfolded as it did. If Doggerland had remained above the waves, how different might Europe's map of migrations have appeared? Perhaps entire languages, entire traditions, are rooted in the footsteps once taken across lands that no longer exist. And if we stood there long enough, we would have seen the bridges vanish. Slowly at first, as warmth stole into the air, the glaciers retreated, seas filling again with liquid patience. Rivers swelled, estuaries widened, mud softened into tide. Islands began to separate, valleys drowned, the first tides surged into lowlands that had been forest and plain. Families escaped to higher ground, carrying only fragments of what was lost, to wake on the shore of Doggerland and watch your valley swallowed day by day must have felt like the end of permanence itself. What was called land was not absolute, but fragile, temporary, dissolving like memory in returning seas. The drowned lands challenge us even now. Beneath the waves, we have found forests still rooted in saltwater silence, trunks blackened but upright, ancient remains of settlements hidden under sediment. Yet so much remains locked away, unreachable, unexcavated beneath thick marine silt. How many human stories have been erased there? How many cultures drowned with no air? Could it be that the ocean floor is the true archive of forgotten humanity, a submerged museum we can scarcely hope to read? Geologists trace the margins with sonar, mapping the ridges that once were rivers, the deltas that once led to fertile floodplains. Archaeologists seek artifacts, remnants, shadows of life upon these bridges, and still imagination must do its part, filling the gaps with wonder. What voices spoke there? What fires burned? What children laughed beneath skies that no longer stand above land? These bridges remind us of how temporary every coastline is. We believe maps to be solid, but they breathe as earth breathes, swelling outward in cold ages, shrinking inward in warmth. The world we walk upon is not fixed but passing, transitional, a shoreline between past and future. And in this rhythm, our own time is but one shoreline too, destined to sink, destined to change. Close your eyes and picture the exile of those who lived upon drowning plains. One season herds graze across miles of grass. The next season tides follow their ankles. The next generation watches the sea consume everything. Their memory lingers only in silence, in the sediment below waves. Maybe myths of flood, found across cultures, are not invention but remembrance, not because seas rose once, but because seas rise always, returning patiently to erase what the ice once gifted. And so land bridges become time bridges. They connect not only continents but living memory to forgetting, geology to story, human persistence to Earth's impermanence. They were thresholds, moments when the map redrew itself, when humans and animals passed into futures they could not know. The bridges remain invisible now, but their echoes are everywhere in our genomes, in our landscapes, in stories of origin. But if seas could drown whole valleys, if rivers themselves were erased or rewritten, what happened when the warming world returned in full, when glaciers no longer grew but shrank, releasing floods, reshaping entire continents with their melting edge? What happened when the warming world returned in full, when glaciers no longer grew but shrank, releasing floods, reshaping entire continents with their melting edge. The end of the Ice Age was not a quiet passing, it was a slow unraveling, a loosening of Earth's frozen grip, a withdrawal that brought as much chaos as it did renewal. For thousands of years the ice had been sculptor and ruler, pressing the land, carving valleys, sealing oceans into vaults. Its retreat was not gentle, it was release, water breaking free, rivers roaring louder than any storm, floods reshaping the face of maps. At first the change would have seemed unremarkable. A glacier paused, its edge softening, a river swelled with melt, but as centuries swelled into millennia, a rhythm accelerated, valleys that once lay beneath silence became torrents. Lakes dammed by ice collapsed in an instant, sending walls of water across plains, carving new gulches and canyons where none had ever been. The Missoula floods in North America, born from failing glacial dams, reshaped entire landscapes overnight, cataclysms that defied the slow pace of geological time. Canyons cut in days, boulders carried like pebbles, a single flood erasing in hours what the glacier had taken centuries to build. And yet, alongside destruction, there was abundance. The rivers spread fertile silt across valleys, enriching soils. As forests crept back with warmer air, animals followed, finding new homes and shifting ranges. Grasslands shrank, but in their place rose ecosystems transformed. New wetlands, swollen lakes, rivers layered with fish where before there had been only ice. The earth in motion was not only violent, but creative. It was rebirth born of disintegration, flowering from disappearance. To those who lived through it, change arrived not in one cataclysm but in generations. A grandparent might describe a glacier they had seen in youth, its edge towering, its voice a creaking thunder. A grandchild might return to the same valley and find only a newborn lake, a meadow blooming where before there had been nothing but frozen wall. For them, landscapes were never still. The map of the world shifted within memory, horizons reshaping as if the earth itself were alive and unsteady. What is permanence? They must have wondered if even mountains retreat. In the melting edge, silence too was broken. Where once the landscape hushed under ice, now rivers sang, waterfalls thundered, new lakes rippled with wind. The disappearance of one silence gave birth to another, soundscape, urgent, flowing, restless. Perhaps those who listened to these waters did not mourn the glaciers, but learned instead that Earth would always change its breath. That loss was also invitation. But did they know what was vanishing? Did they understand that never again would the great ice sheets cloak these valleys with the same weight, the same timeless quiet? Entropies flowed more quickly now, where glaciers compressed and preserved. Their absence sped decay. Forests returned, but they too rotted, burned, shifted. Animals spread quickly, carrying seeds, shaping the soils with their hooves, their grazing, their migrations. Even humans expanded, their pathways freed of frozen boundaries. Perhaps the melting edge gave rise not just to new rivers, but to new movements of thought, to new myths of beginning, to flourishes of population that finally allowed civilizations to sprout. Vulnerability gave way to possibility. And yet, in that opening, something was lost. Mammoths and their kin dwindled, unable to adapt both to the hunting and the shrinking of their meadows. Saber-tooths faded, giant bears slipped away. As warmth gave, it also took. Could it be that every transition, no matter how generous, always draws a price, that in each renewal something is forgotten, ground into silence, so that change itself can continue? Picture, if you can, the last great floods pouring across a continent, gorges widening as waters thunder forward. Hills crumble, valleys drown, lakes spread. It is not the slow patience of geology, but the sudden voice of release, echoing through deep time. Imagine the awe of those who stood upon higher ground, watching the world itself break apart, then settle again. Their stories, if they told them, would not speak of millennia or glacial retreat. They would speak simply of a world transforming in front of them, as if nature itself had moods, as if time did not crawl but ran. And in that running, new coastlines drew themselves. Oceans swelled with the return of locked water. Islands formed. Bridges were cut. Valleys were swallowed beneath every widening tide. The world of memory, of herds and frozen plains, slipped beneath both soil and sea. Those alive then stepped forward, but their ancestors' lands vanished behind them, irretrievable. To lose terrain is to lose story, and so entire chapters of human history drowned quietly beneath the warm surge. The melting edge reminds us of this paradox that creation and destruction are not opposites but partners. What glaciers erased, meltwater revived. What floods destroyed, soils enriched. What animals lost, others gained. Silence gave way to sound, permanence gave way to change. And in this way the earth revealed once more that stability is the illusion and flux the truth. But if thawing unravels history so quickly, if floods swallow valleys in days, what then of humanity's role in shaping what comes after? Did our ancestors simply endure these transformations, or did they begin to shape their own planting stories, cultivating survival, birthing the first sparks of civilization from the ruins left behind by the melting world? Did they begin to shape their own planting stories, cultivating survival, birthing the first sparks of civilization from the ruins left behind by the melting world? For when the ice retreated, it did not only leave scars of stone and valleys reshaped by floods, it left opportunity, an opening across which humanity could step into something new. Fields of wild grasses spread where glaciers had crushed mountains into powder. Rivers swollen with meltwater wound like silver threads across the land, nourishing valleys shaping fertile plains. Lakes gleamed in the hollows left as the ice withdrew. And on these transformed landscapes our ancestors began to linger, not just as hunters and wanderers, but as planters of futures. Civilization, as we call it, had not yet formed, but its seeds lay within these changed worlds. Perhaps on the edges of rivers, humans noticed that grasses grew thicker where seeds had fallen. Perhaps they saw animals return to graze in the same valleys year after year, their migrations slower, their herds smaller. Perhaps one season, after returning to a familiar clearing, they realized that plants they had gathered the year before had spread new shoots, as if memory itself had taken root in the earth. Could this recognition have been the first whisper of agriculture? The thought that the land might yield, not spontaneously, but in rhythm with human care. Villages may have grown from camps, set along these newly fertile waters. At first they were only small gatherings, huts of reeds, stone rings for fire, people staying longer than seasons required. But permanence has a way of multiplying. Food stored, fire tended, pathways retraced again and again, until what was once passing became foundation. Civilization does not begin with monuments. It begins with patience, with waiting through winters in place, with returning to the same bend of river, with trusting that the land will give again what it gave before. The melting edge of the Ice Age, then, was not only geography changing, it was consciousness changing. For thousands of years people had followed herds. Now the herds themselves shrank, forests grew, and grasses spread into vast carpets across floodplains. Humanity looked outward and found that nature's rhythm might be not only followed but guided. It must have seemed miraculous that seeds could be scattered and would rise again, that fruit could be preserved, that clay could hold water, that fire-hardened soil would last for more than one season. Civilization in waiting was not born suddenly, it was summoned slowly, like dawn after a long polar night. And alongside seeds, stories shifted as well. Once myths spoke of movement, of migration, of bridges of land, of herds flowing endlessly across plains. Now new myths must have been born, tales of roots, of cycles returning, of permanence discovered where once impermanence had ruled. As we see in later generations, these stories coalesced into gods of harvest, spirits of river, beings tied not to wandering but to place. Could it be that the melting edge carved not only valleys for grain but mythologies for dwelling, that spirituality itself was reshaped by the patient return of warmth? Scientists read in soil the traces of this turning. Charcoal deposits show fire tended season after season. Pollen profiles reveal sudden increases of wheat, barley, rice. Stone grinders unearthed in sites trace the shift from bone and sinew hunting toward the patient labor of grinding seeds into flour. Even the bones of small animals, sheep, goats, cattle, suggest gradual pathways into domestication. Creatures pulled slowly into relationship, their migration altered forever by human hands. History was not yet written, but it was germinating in the quiet collaboration of field, water, fire, and hut. Yet, as always, there is forgetting alongside remembering. What became of the old ways of the great hunters of the cold plains, those who painted bisons and mammoths within firelit caves? Did they vanish with the herds they pursued, or did their descendants lay aside spears for sickles, stories for new gods, caves for villages? Perhaps echoes of those older lives still thread into us, the urge to wander, even when soil anchors, the ache for wildness, even within walls. We carry both, the memory of hunter and the patience of farmer inside us, unresolved, inseparable. Imagine yourself at one of these first river settlements, the air warm with new spring, the soil dark and fertile underfoot. People kneel to plant seeds, their hands guiding what memory of hunger has taught them. Children fetch water from a river swollen with glacial melt, sunlight catching its restless surface. At night, fire still warms them, but stories are changing, no longer of endless chasing across frozen plains, but of rootedness, of land as home rather than passage. To sit there would be to sense history shifting, not loudly but with subtle, steady inevitability, the quiet settling of permanence into human hearts. And yet, permanence was never true. Rivers could still flood, crops could fail, warmth itself could falter. Civilization was not security, but attempt, not certainty, but hope. The waiting was not over, it was only beginning. Perhaps what we call civilization is itself only a fragile experiment, tested again and again by entropy, by shifting skies, by the endless reminder that nothing lasts as it is. Still, the image endures, people building lives along rivers, the glaciers carved, inventing futures upon landscapes. Ice had erased, finding permanence in the spaces left behind by impermanence. Civilization was not separate from the Ice Age. It was its echo, its offspring. The shivering forests, the vanishing herds, the floods of meltwater, the shifting of skies and maps, all converged in humanity's slow turn towards settlement. Civilization was born not in defiance of ice, but because of it. And so, when we ask how humanity emerged from the shadow of glaciers, perhaps the answer is simple: we did not escape the Ice Age. We are still living within its gifts and its ruins. Our rivers, our plains, our soils, they are the remnants of the melting edge, silent foundations upon which we continue to build. But if the melting ice gave rise to the first hesitations of permanence, then it also gave us memory inscribed upon the earth itself, stone valleys polished by glaciers, ridges that trace their edges, vast landscapes still carrying their print. And so we turn now from the seed of civilization back into the stone itself, the memory kept not by people alone but in the mountains and valleys that still remember the weight of ice. Back into the stone itself, the memory kept not by people alone but in the mountains and valleys that still remember the weight of ice. For though forests retreat, herds vanish, and humans turn their footsteps into fields, stone carries its story silently, unyielding to the passage of centuries yet deeply inscribed by the pressure of glaciers. To gaze at the modern landscape is to see testimony carved not long ago in geological time, but within recent memory of the earth, as though the Ice Age left behind an unfinished letter written in valleys and cliffs. Glaciers moved with the strength of continents, and stone bore their signatures. Valleys once narrow and sharp became broad and deep, their sides smoothed into gentle U-shaped cradles. Cirques hollowed themselves at mountain summits, small basins where snow gathered to breed new movement of ice. Moraines, long ridges of boulders and gravel, trace the line where glaciers once paused, their retreat marked like punctuation across the land. These are not random scars, they are the language of ice, speaking in stone, revealing the reach of ancient cold. Perhaps more haunting are the erratics, boulders carried far from their parent cliffs, dropped in fields as though placed there by invisible hands. To the unknowing, they are puzzles, solitary giants resting inexplicably in meadows. Yet science tells us their journey, plucked by glaciers, carried in slowness, let fall as the ice melted, left stranded as evidence of migration. They are reminders that even rock is not forever fixed, that permanence itself is vulnerable to movement across time. When we trace these features, it is like reading the memory of Earth itself. Each striation cut into bedrock by grinding stone, each polished surface glinting under sunlight, whispers of ice passing here not long ago. To walk such a valley is to step not only through space, but through compressed layers of memory, a cathedral built without walls, where the arches are mountains themselves, and the songs are echoes of vanished glaciers. And yet, stone remembers differently than ice, where ice dissolves. Stone endures, it distorts less, collapses less, loses detail more slowly, but its memory is roughened, incomplete. It cannot preserve the roar of rivers beneath ice, nor the breath of mammoths across frozen soil. It cannot recall the stories told by humans beneath auroras. Stone remembers weight, pressure, abrasion, an elemental memory, stripped of tenderness, but immense in authority. Perhaps that is why standing before a glacial valley feels so humbling, not because the stone tells us everything, but because it tells so little, yet with such certainty. The memory of stone is also a kind of forgetting. For every mark carved, countless others erode. Rain softens grooves, moss veils striations, forests grow where moraines once marked silence. A valley once raw becomes pastoral, a scar becomes scenery. The ice age dissolves within beauty, its violence hidden beneath the comfort of grass and tree. Time is not unkind in this way. It heals even as it erases, covering wounds until memory feels like dream. But beneath, the marks remain for those who know how to see them. Close your eyes and stand where two mountains cradle a valley. Imagine it not as it is now, but as it was then, filled not with rivers but with ice, not with birdsong but with silence broken by distant creaks, groans of frozen mass against stone. Picture the glacier flowing slowly, polishing walls, dragging great boulders across cliffs, leaving striations like scars. Then open your eyes again, see the green valley, the grazing herds, the river bright and alive, and realize you stand inside a memory still present, still visible in the broad shape of stone. And so, stone holds its testimony quietly, awaiting curiosity to awaken it. Geologists read the glacial code, the grooves, the erratics, the moraines, the cirques, but beyond science there is feeling in this recognition, the sense that the earth itself contains memory deeper than any book, inscribed not in words but in the patient carving of its own body. These landscapes are not only natural wonders, they are archives, reminders that nothing we know has ever stood unchanged. Perhaps this is why we are drawn to mountains, valleys, and cliffs with such quiet reverence. We sense their endurance, their slow witness of time, their patience. They are both presence and remembrance. But even stone forgets eventually, eroded back to dust, subducted into mantle, erased in fire. Memory lingers only for an age before being pulled deeper, broken apart, remade. If the glaciers shaped stone and gave it memory, then the rhythm behind both, the advance and retreat, the etching then erasure, was guided by something greater still. Not random, not chaotic, but by patterns vast enough to command oceans, skies, and seasons. For to understand why glaciers came, we must listen not only to stone, but to the pulse of the planet itself, the celestial rhythms that ushered in ice, then warmth, then ice again. For to understand why glaciers came, we must listen not only to stone, but to the pulse of the planet itself, the celestial rhythms that ushered in ice, then warmth, then ice again. The Ice Age was not an accident, nor was it a singular event. It was part of a cycle written into Earth's dance around the sun, a slow choreography orchestrated over tens of thousands of years. This rhythm is subtle, almost imperceptible within a human lifetime, but immense in its reach, commanding oceans, climates, forests, and the very breadth of life. The shape of Earth's orbit is not constant. It stretches and relaxes in great ellipses, swinging closer to the sun and drawing back again over cycles of 90 to 100,000 years. Its axis too is restless, tilting slightly more then slightly less, changing the way sunlight spreads across latitudes, and the planet wobbles like a spinning top, precession slowly twisting the orientation of its seasons. Separately these motions are gentle, barely noticeable, but together they form the metronome of planetary winter, the Milankovitch cycle's cosmic rhythms guiding the breath of ice. When all align toward cold, the planet exhales in glaciers. Snow that falls in high latitudes no longer melts in summer, building year by year into ice sheets that sprawl outward. Seas grow shallower, forests retreat, herds gather in step. When the alignment shifts again toward warmth, ice retreats, rivers swell, and valleys bloom green once more. Back and forth the rhythm continues, shaping the grand oscillation of climate long before our kind could name it. What we see in one lifetime is only a flicker of this vast pendulum, yet the pendulum swings regardless. Is it not humbling to think that our world's seasons of deep time are written not only in Earth's soil, but in the heavens above? That the coldness of a valley, the migration of mammoths, the survival of forests, even the shape of rivers, were tied quietly to the tilt of a planet, the shape of orbit, the slow turning of celestial gears, we cannot feel. Could it be that memory itself, for every species that wandered frozen plains, was guided by motions of sky as much as by steps of foot? The isotopes in ice and ocean sediments bear witness. Their ratios rise and fall in patterns that mirror these cycles precisely, a frozen echo of planetary rhythm. Every few tens of thousands of years, the signature of expanded glaciers returns, then fades. It is as if time itself were breathing, inhale cold, exhale warmth, over and over, layered into the geological record. And like breath, it shows us that even the most immense states of the world are temporary, part of a larger, ongoing respiration. But these rhythms are not mechanical alone. Entropy enters too, the inevitability of randomness, the irregularities of eruption, asteroid, ocean current. Noise folds itself into pattern, destruction bends shape. The pulse is not metronome alone, but music written both in order and in variation. Perhaps the truer word than cycle is song, a planetary song sung across hundreds of millennia, with verses of ice, refrains of warmth, and pauses of transformation. For those who lived it, the pulse was invisible. To a hunter, snow was only winter, warmth only summer. Yet through generations, story and memory may have carried faint echoes, the sense that the world was turning larger than their lifespans, that ice drew near in rhythms and receded again long after their passing. Myths of endless winters, of fire returning after darkness, of water covering valleys, may be human translations of cosmic cycles never consciously felt. Could our deepest legends be shadows cast by celestial rhythms beyond human understanding? Close your eyes and imagine Earth from a distance. Not over days, but over tens of millennia. Its orbit stretches and contracts. Its axis tilts and shifts. Its seasons drift in place. Glaciers grow like slow white tides, then recede into blue oceans. Forests surge northward, then shrink again. Animals wander with expanding plains, then withdraw as green recedes. People cross bridges when seas fall, retreat to higher ground when seas return. all of it tied to the slow pulse of planetary winter, the long metronome of orbit and tilt. And now, as we live within a rare interlude of warmth, we feel the subtle unease of knowing the glaciers could advance again. If cycles align, will they return one day, white walls pressing southward once more, reclaiming valleys, pushing forests aside? Or will our own actions, our reshaping of atmosphere, rewrite the cycles, overwhelm the delicate rhythm with a louder disruption of carbon and heat? Perhaps planetary winter's pulse remains unchanged, steady beneath all, waiting with patience that only geology knows. Perhaps not. The pulse itself teaches humility. It reminds us that we are part of a larger scale, that what feels immovable, the shape of our maps, the permanence of warmth, is simply a single note in a song older than humanity. If stone remembers glaciers, it is only because skies wrote their arrival. And if skies wrote glaciers, it is because planets and stars dictated the rhythm. The Ice Age, then, is not only Earth's story, but a planetary story, a celestial story. And so, as we listen to this pulse in silence, we are left with a question. If the sky commands ice, and ice commands life, then what of the last echoes, the final survivors of cold? What of those creatures who lingered longer than all others, clinging to islands of survival when the mainland had already forgotten them? What of those creatures who lingered longer than all others, clinging to islands of survival when the mainland had already forgotten them? The mammoth, once sovereign across steppes and plains, did not vanish in one sweeping silence. Long after their kin had fallen in Eurasia and the Americas, long after voices of herds had faded into absence, small groups persisted, stranded by the rising floods on isolated islands, far from the hunters, far from the vast continents that had already moved on. On Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, the mammoths endured until only a few thousand years ago, closer in time to the building of the pyramids than to their Ice Age ancestors. Smaller than their towering cousins, dwarfed by scarcity, they browsed along tundra ridges and drank from icy streams beneath northern skies. Imagine them, the last survivors of a world already forgotten, their shadows stretching across shores where no human eyes watched. The great auroras still shimmered above them, but there were no herds to trumpet in reply, no lions to prowl after them, no human hunters to carve them into story, alone yet alive. To be the last of a kind must be a strange existence. Did the final mammoths sense their solitude? Did they remember the echo of crowded migrations, the thunder of many feet moving together across plains? Or did memory pass too lightly from one generation to the next, with calves knowing only a smaller world, never aware of what had once been? Extinction, seen closely, is not always sudden catastrophe. It is gradual narrowing until presence itself is diminished, until perspective shrinks to what little remains. The last mammoths may not have mourned what was lost. They may have simply lived, unaware they carried the final thread of an ancient song. And yet we, looking back, cannot help but mourn for them. For to know their fate is to know silence where once there was endless noise. Their story is heavy, not because they were giants, but because they lasted so long, lingering like a half-remembered dream, slipping slowly beneath time while civilizations elsewhere kindled fire, drew maps, and wrote words. Ice Age and history overlapped in shocking nearness. Perhaps if we stood on Wrangel Island just 4,000 years ago, we would have seen them lift their trunks into Arctic winds, unaware that they were ghosts walking in a world already changed beyond their knowing. Science, steady as it is, speaks of shrinking populations, of inbreeding, of genetic fragility compounding over centuries. The bones left scattered in permafrost reveal smaller stature, weaker variation, mistakes in DNA accumulating as the herd grew thin. It is the biology of endings, the slow fading of a lineage when chances grow too few. But within those fragile remains lies evidence too of resilience. They endured for millennia past the fall of their kin. They persisted in places no one else dared. They clung to existence while the planet rewrote its maps. Even in their decline, They remind us that survival is not always triumph, but sometimes stubborn continuation against silence. Close your eyes and imagine the last mammoth alive. Perhaps a female, standing at dawn on a tundra shore, breathing clouds of steam into the pale light. Around her lies stillness, no herds to flank her, no trumpeting calls in distance. She drinks, she grazes, she turns her ears toward a wind that carries only the empty echo of what once was. For her this is simply life, neither tragic nor grand, just the daily work of being. For us it is haunting, the quietest chapter of deep time playing out in one forgotten corner of the earth. The dream of the last mammoth is not only theirs but ours. They remind us how fragile abundance is, how easily endless plains can compress into islands, how swiftly species can recede to their final whispers. But perhaps they also remind us of endurance, of carrying memory longer than expected, of lingering against erasure. They lasted long enough for their presence to almost overlap with ours, long enough to teach us that extinction does not erase immediately. It watches, it waits, it lets its last dream flicker faintly before vanishing into silence. And if mammoths could dream so long after their world was gone, what might our own world bequeath to future memory? What of us could linger, not as numbers, not as stories, but as traces carried into climate and ice, into sediment and soil? If stone and glacier and dust remember, if mammoths remember in silence, then what is the shape of what we will leave behind? Perhaps the answer, fragile and uncomfortable, lies not ahead of us, but already locked away in ice that still holds the breath of ancient storms, in cores that speak with the memory of both fire and frost. For when we hold a cylinder of ice drawn from Greenland or Antarctica, we are not only touching the past, we are cradling the future. Within its bubbles, the atmosphere reveals cycles, rhythms, patterns of warmth and cold that arc far beyond any human calendar. In those frozen libraries, the Earth has already written messages for what may come. The gases trapped in deep ice are strange prophets. Layer upon layer, they tell of carbon rising, of methane surging, of stumbles in climate, when glaciers retreated or advanced. They tell of abrupt warmings, sudden cold snaps, droughts that reshaped continents. These chemical signatures are not simply dead record, they are warnings inscribed in silence, reminders that the dance of climate is never still. As we measure their ratios with fragile instruments, we are not only deciphering a record of what was, but glimpsing what could be written again if the cycles return, or if we hasten them ourselves. The paradox of ice is unsettling. It is past and prophecy. When mammoth breath is found in a sealed bubble, it carries not only memory of that ancient air, but the conditions that govern survival. When volcanic ash layers are uncovered, they tell us how easily one fiery cough of earth dimmed skies, altered harvests, shifted time, and when sudden spikes of greenhouse gases appear in a stratum, they whisper of fragilities already tested, already endured. Ice tells us that Earth corrects itself in rhythms beyond human scale, and yet it tells us also how precariously those rhythms balance before sliding into a new state. Could it be that when we peer into ancient ice, we are looking not backward but into a mirror angled forward, that these isotopes, these bubbles, these frozen diaries carry not only echoes of mammoths and glaciers, but shadows of futures yet to arrive? The cycles reveal inevitability. Warmth follows cold, cold follows warmth, but the manner of their return, their timing, their violence, may be waiting to reveal themselves in us in what we choose now to do. Imagine standing in a sterile lab while a core is lifted gently, a frozen column tens of thousands of years old. Scientists slice it, measure it, catalogue it, and yet behind the precision is a humbling awareness. They are holding air breathed in by ancient grasses, by reindeer, by winds that swept dust across long-vanished plains. They are holding storms we never felt, droughts that shaped migrations of people now forgotten. And yet the questions they ask are not just about what was, they are about what may return, what is already beginning to whisper through our present atmosphere. Entropy may be the law that bends all form to disorder, but ice is its momentary resistance, capturing fleeting conditions, holding them steady against the forward rush of time. If entropy erodes memory, ice preserves it only long enough for us to find, then melt resumes the forgetting. Perhaps this is the grace and the warning. The records are temporary gifts, glimpses of both past cycles and future storms before they dissolve again into water, anonymity, absence. Close your eyes and imagine a world thousands of years hence. Perhaps glaciers have surged outward again, reclaiming forests, swallowing cities under white silence. Perhaps warmth has grown instead. Seas flooding lowlands, permafrost gone, coasts drowned like Doggerland once was. If so, the seeds of those futures are already present in the cores beneath Antarctic snow. The planet has rehearsed them before. It knows their script. We are only the latest actors to step into this ancient play. And still, there is humility in knowing that not even the ice remembers forever. Cores grow brittle, layers compress, gases escape. The oldest secrets are distorted, centuries pressing against centuries until detail becomes blur. The future, too, will one day be erased, replaced by other future pasts. When we consider what remains, perhaps the true immortality is not in data preserved, but in questions lingering. What will those who come after us find in the frozen silence? A record of balance, or a signature of disturbance, a spike so sudden it sings with alarm? The future may be frozen into the past, not because it is inevitable, but because it is contained in possibility. The cycles show range. The atmosphere shows consequence. By reading them, we know both the resilience and the fragility of the world. They suggest futures we may yet delay, or hasten, or transform. We cannot step outside the rhythm, but we may alter the tempo. And so, the prophecy the ice writes is not fixed. It is tentative, conditional, alive. And isn't that the tender strangeness of memory itself? That to remember is not only to preserve what happened, but to shape how the present imagines what could be. Each bubble of ancient air is therefore half history, half omen. When we place it against our lips, we are inhaling both what was and what might be. The future is already here, frozen, waiting for its thaw. And if ice can hold the shape of the future, just as it does the past, then what of silence itself? What of the great hush that falls when the ice recedes, when waters calm, when absence fills valleys? Perhaps silence, too, is a kind of prophecy, carrying us softly past memory into the sound of what is no longer there. Perhaps silence, too, is a kind of prophecy, carrying us softly past memory into the sound of what is no longer there. For silence was never emptiness in the Ice Age. It was fullness of a different kind, a presence shaped by what could no longer be heard. Beneath the glaciers, silence swelled like an invisible ocean pressing upon the land. To stand among their frozen walls was to feel that hush upon your chest, steady and immense, filling the air with its weight. But even silence has texture. It is not uniform, not blank. The silence of falling snow is different from the silence of frozen nights beneath auroras. The first is soft, the world muted grain by grain as flakes gather, a hush drawn across valleys like a woolen cloth. The second is vast, the sky alive with shimmering light while the air is still, not a whisper but a kind of expectant pause. Then there is the silence after a glacier carves into the sea, moments of stunned quiet after thunder, as if the earth itself held its breath. Silence in every form carried meaning. It was sound's gentle absence, the unvoiced companion of ice. To those who lived within it, silence was never void. Around campfires, small crackles of flame broke it. The breathing of herds in distance punctuated it. The howl of wolves stretched across it. And yet once those faded, silence returned, patient, steady, enfolding everything. Perhaps it was this silence that gave rise to thought, to story, to awe. without noise always crowding their ears. Ice Age people lived inside stillness vast enough to hear their own heartbeat, their own wonder, their own questions echoing against the frozen sky. Geology too speaks in silence. A polished rock face bears no sound but tells of centuries ground by glacier weight. Moraines stand still, mute ridges of stone that testify wordlessly to where ice once paused. Even extinction speaks this way, not through roar but through vanishing hoofbeats, through the silence left when no mammoth trumpeted across plains. Silence, then, is memory itself translated, not the thing remembered but the space it leaves behind. And yet, silence shifts as the world changes. As glaciers melted, what had been hushed for ages broke into rushing rivers, into the song of waters reclaiming the valleys. One silence gave way to another, the silence of absence. Species gone, valleys drowned, plains no longer open but hidden beneath seas. This silence has sharper edges, for it reminds us not only that something is gone, but that it will never return as it was. Still, within this sharpness, we are taught humility. To listen to silence is to admit limits, to feel fully the brevity of presence. Close your eyes and try to hear the Ice Age night. First the muffled crunch of snow beneath foot, then the call of a wolf fading across distance. Then nothing. No hum of machines, no thunder of cities, no crowding noise of modern days. Only sky, only wind, only the stillness of earth unbroken. Such silence is almost unimaginable to us now. It is not simply quiet, it is immersion, the whole body attentive, aware of absence as presence. It was a silence that surely carried weight in dreams, shaping the way our ancestors thought, prayed, painted, and remembered. In the end, perhaps silence was the greatest teacher of the Ice Age, teaching patience, because no sound meant waiting. Teaching awe because in stillness, light and fire seemed to speak louder. Teaching humility because in the vast hush of a glacier, the human voice felt impossibly small. And maybe silence is still teaching us, though we often refuse to hear, surrounding ourselves with constant noise, filling absence with distraction. Yet the glaciers remind us that silence can tell truths words cannot. For silence is not merely a pause but a language. A glacier carving valleys without sound is still speaking. A mammoth herd gone from the plains speaks in silence sharper than a roar. An ice core muted in its frozen column speaks with greater authority than any book. When silence speaks, it says this was once here, and now it is not. It says listen, and you might feel not just what remains but what has disappeared. And so we lean into it, listening to silence as prophecy, as memory, as guide. For silence tells us not only what is gone, but what could vanish still. It leads us softly toward questions unspoken. If the Ice Age taught us silence, what happens if that silence returns? Could glaciers once again press upon the world, carrying their great hush into our valleys and forests? Could the prophecy of silence one day be fulfilled in our own lives? Could the prophecy of silence one day be fulfilled in our own lives? What if the glaciers stirred again, their white tides gathering at the edges of continents, pressing outward with the same patient strength they once carried? What if tomorrow did not dawn into green fields and warm horizons, but into the slow arrival of ice, advancing not by day, not even by generation, but still creeping forward, unmoved by our walls, our maps, our memory of warmth? Imagine opening your window to a sky dimmed by heavy clouds, the air sharper, colder, the sound outside muffled as if the world had drawn a curtain across itself. At first it would feel only like a particularly hard winter, but the season would never quite end. Springs would shrink, autumns vanish, crops would falter, forests withdraw. Snow that fell this year would not melt in the next, or the next after that. Layer upon layer, the seasons would collapse into permanence, until an eternal winter wrote itself across the land. Cities would stand bewildered before such return. Towers built upon ancient floodplains would find themselves buried not in water but in snowdrifts deepening year after year. Roads would disappear beneath white weight, rails and bridges bending under ice. The noise of our age, the hum of traffic, the echo of industry would falter, swallowed by the thicker silence the ice remembers. Could our civilization endure what our ancestors faced, stripped of their cities, carrying only fire and patience into endless cold? Or would our fragility appear more clearly than theirs, our illusions of permanence dissolving against the truth of glacial time? So science shows us this is not impossible. Earth's orbit and tilt will continue to change, cycles unfolding again as they always have. The wobble of precession, the reach of ellipticity, the delicate angle of planetary tilt all conspire toward future winters, toward the breathing in of planetary cold. We live in a rare warmth, a brief interglacial pause, but pauses are all they are, left unaltered. The pulse of planetary winter would one day draw ice forward again. It has before. It may again. The true unknown is whether we will hasten or hinder, disrupt or redirect its long return. And yet, beyond the mechanics of orbit, lies a deeper question. What would it mean for us, for memory, for the shape of our story, if ice returned tomorrow? Could we find dignity in retreat, patience in survival, humility in rebuilding anew under pale skies? Or would silence grow so strong it erased not only forests and rivers, but the myths and voices that we carry? Perhaps to imagine the return of ice is not only to think of survival but of remembrance. What of us would remain preserved, entombed in frozen mass, waiting for some future patience to uncover? Close your eyes and see the horizon, white and unending, mountains diminished beneath blankets of frost, valleys filled not with crops or rivers, but hollow lakes beneath sheets of ice, a single bird cutting across the dim sky, wings labouring against thick air. In the distance, a cluster of humans huddled around fire, their voices pressed into the vast silence, each word fragile, temporary, carrying all their hope. In such a vision we glimpse both endings and beginnings, for the Ice Age never destroyed life completely. It only reshaped it, tested it, humbled it. Perhaps the return of ice tomorrow would be reminder rather than punishment, a reminder of cycles greater than us, of silence still hidden beneath our noise, of the fragility of permanence. We, who think our cities eternal, would learn again what our ancestors already knew, that nothing is everlasting, that survival is always provisional, that mystery is older than memory. Maybe the return of glaciers is not threat alone, but lesson and invitation to listen once more to silence, to measure time in patience, to relearn awe beneath pale skies. But even in imagining we face the strangeness of contradiction, for while planetary rhythm may invite ice to return, our actions invite warmth, the atmosphere altered by our fire, the cycle disrupted by human hand. It could be that the prophecy of silence is diverted, that instead of glaciers we inherit rising seas, forests burning not in frost but in heat. Either way, the message is clear. The comforts we know are not permanent. The maps we cling to are provisional, whether drowned by tide or buried in ice. Our civilizations are temporary sentences written upon a page. The earth is already turning. And so the question sits quietly, unresolved, resonant, not whether ice will return, but how we will remember, how we will endure, whether as survivors shaping myths beneath auroras, or as whispers left in frozen strata for others to uncover. Because in the end, ice is never only ice. It is memory, it is forgetting, it is prophecy, it is the patient reminder that nothing holds forever, not mountains, not forests, not cities, not us. And if the glaciers did return tomorrow, would we hear in their silence a voice we had almost forgotten? Would we recognize within their white immensity the same lesson whispered all along, that to live is to be temporary, that to endure is to be humbled, that to be remembered is to accept forgetting? Maybe the question is not whether they return, but whether we are listening when silence speaks,